Welcome, commissioners and public. This is the third meeting of the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change for Sacramento and West Sac. For those of you who might be new, I thought I would just remind you of our mandate, which is very simple. It's to address the climate crisis by advising the respective mayors on strategies to achieve carbon zero by 2045. And they asked us to be bold and audacious, so let's keep that in mind as we act today. Before we start, I have some announcements about membership on the commission. We have a new member, Mackenzie Weiser. She's the chair of the Elk Grove Planning Commission, and she also works at the State Office of Planning and Research. She's a program manager and works on climate change there. Mackenzie came to us through Mayor Steve Lee of Elk Grove. He called after the last meeting and asked if he could appoint someone to the commission. So this is a good chance for Elk Grove to learn as we learn, and also for us to get more of a regional perspective. So welcome, Mackenzie. We also have two commission members leaving us. I think you all already know, but Julia Burrows, who's been a wonderful member, is leaving us. That's the bad news, but on the positive side, she's been hired to work in Mayor Steinberg's office, and will be a special assistant there. She'll be staffing the mayor on climate change, housing, and diversity. So, Julia, very grateful for all you've given us, and I know we'll continue to get the benefit of your talents and expertise. And then, where's Flo? Right there. Flo. Flo John Kofer, who's also been a wonderful member, had the honor of being appointed as chair of the City of Sacramento's Measure U Advisory Committee, which is, as we all know, a huge, huge job. So she's going to be stepping down from this, but we hope to find ways that our work can connect with the Measure U work. And Flo, thank you for what you've done for us, and good luck with your new post. We are looking for one additional commission member, and we'll keep our total number at 19. So more on that later. The purpose of our meeting today is really twofold. We have, first, a pretty comprehensive report on community engagement to date. We'll hear from several folks on that. And then we will move to the built environment recommendations from the Technical Advisory Committee. They're coming forward with three powerful strategies. We'll hear from them, we'll have public comment on those, and we'll have a discussion and action by this body. Public comment, same as always, the cards are at the back, so if you would like to make a public comment, please fill that out and give it to Helena, who's here in the striped shirt. The public comment will be at the end as usual, unless you want to comment on the built environment recommendations. Those we'll take during that agenda item, so please indicate on your card if that's the case. So I think that's it. We've got a lot to do today, so let's get to it. First order of business is to hear from Kate Meese from the Local Government Commission. She'll give us a progress report on activities since the last meeting. Kate.
Great, thank you, Anne. So since our last meeting, we had a number of comments from all of our commissioners that we had kind of overwhelmed you guys with the amount of strategies that the Technical Advisory Committee came up with. So we went back to the Technical Advisory Committee and asked them to focus on three high leverage, high priority strategies. So that will be presented to you today to vote on. And what we will be doing is voting on the high level strategies, voting to advance them to final consideration. So that means there may be some changes as we develop strategies for the other technical advisory committees, but we are choosing to move them forward for consideration for final recommendations. So that's what that means when we will get to the vote at the end of this. Another key component of our last meeting was this idea that we need community engagement, and you all wanted to hear what some of the equity implications would be and how we would be serving some of our our neighborhoods that need, that some of our underserved neighborhoods. So we convened 2 equity roundtables, and that feedback will be presented at this meeting. And specifically, we asked them for their input on the proposed built environment strategies, and we asked them for criteria and filters for how they would like the other technical advisory committees to move forward. So we'll have some of that to share with you all. So just a quick overview of the, do we have the, oh yeah, it's up there. Okay, good. Quick overview of the process, just as a reminder. We have 3 main technical advisory committees. This one today is focused on the final recommendations from the Built Environment TAC. So that relates to land use and buildings. Quickly after this meeting, we're going to move on to our second technical advisory committee on mobility. So that will cover all things transportation, transit, active transportation, electric vehicles, and some of the emerging mobility services. So those are the recommendations that will come next to this committee. We also will have a community health and resiliency technical advisory committee. So some of the recommendations that originally came up at our last meeting around parks and open spaces, that will be moved to the health and resiliency committee, and those recommendations will come as well. That'll incorporate food waste, urban forestry, and a number of other strategies that will have positive public health and social equity benefits. So be looking for that. Another component that we will be doing is we'll be holding a business and finance roundtable. So we also heard loud and clear from the commissioners that you guys want to have at least an indication of some of the impacts on economic development and jobs, and you want an indication of some of the potential funding and financing sources that will be available. So you'll see in the recommendations, we have covered that at a high level, but we want to loop back with the businesses in this region to talk about, potential impacts once we have our whole suite of strategies towards the end of the process. So we will be doing that. And I know that, we are kind of picking these different issues and siloing them to some degree and how we're approaching them with the technical experts. But as we come back and propose the whole suite of strategies, we will be looking at how to integrate those strategies, and we will be looking at it again through the lens of, does this make sense as a portfolio for our approach to getting to carbon neutral? So just wanted to make that clear going into it. We have also talked with the commissioners, with each of you, about the fact that we have needed to extend our scope. So we are looking at now holding up to 9 meetings, and that is in response to the request for more public engagement, and it was clear that we needed more of a dialogue with all of you and with our technical experts and with the community members in the public engagement process as well. So we appreciate you all being willing to hang in there with us. I'm going to go into a little bit the community engagement process, and we'll hear from the city as well on what they're doing to give you a sense of how we will be aligning with some of the other efforts of the city of the city of Sacramento to make sure we have robust inclusion and plenty of input to come back to you with. And I'll also note that we had some discussion at the last meeting around the definition of carbon zero. We are still working with the original definition that we presented at the first meeting, but we did get the feedback from all of you that you want further clarification and refinement. So we're still working on that and still trying to follow the state's process and the definition that they're creating, which they have not come up with a fully baked one either. So that's where we're at. And I think I'll turn it over to Ann for any clarifying questions, and then we'll move on to the community engagement piece.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Thanks for all the work since the last meeting. Questions on the progress report before we move on? Okay. Looks like there aren't any. Okay, so back to you, Kate, to update us on the community engagement.
Okay. Back. Up here. We'll jump in as she's pulling that up. So we've had a lot of interest from the community on this process, which has been really fantastic. So we have had a number of meetings since our last commission meeting with the city of Sacramento and have identified a number of ways to align with their community engagement activities. And Remy will be sharing what those activities are, so we'll have a really good sense of how that process will fit in with the commission's process. Local Government Commission, Helena, and other staff have been reviewing both the comments from these meetings, and then also we've got a process online where people have been submitting comments, so that will be represented through some of the feedback we will be sharing with all of you, and we will continue to bring that input back to you all. We also have had an opportunity to align with a couple of regional surveys. One is in partnership with the Capital Region Readiness Collaborative and with the Air District, and another with Valley Vision, and we'll hear a presentation from Meg later today. And Mayor, do you want to make any comments while you're here?
Welcome, Mayor Steinberg. Good timing. This is our third meeting.
We're about to dive in and vote on some strategies here. Put them on the spot.
How do you plead, sir?
Chair and members, please start the clock. 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Hanson. I knew you were going to do that. I really, I'm privy to the work that you've done so far and the recommendations that are before you, and I just really am grateful that this esteemed group of city leaders have dove in the way that you have, and that the work that you're producing is really substantive, and it's going to guide us, and it's bold from what I have seen. And that's exactly when we started this, what we envisioned and what we wanted. Not a report that doesn't get looked at, but a set of action items that allow us over the course of time with urgency to actually change our respective city and regional policies around being a leader in climate. And I know some of it involves resources over at the State House, and we're committed to all of that as well. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you.
Thank you for your leadership.
Any questions? Good work. Okay, bye.
All right, have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, Kate.
So I'll dive into some of the public input that we have heard so far, hopefully. So what we're hearing is there is a lot of support from both cities in investing and accelerating climate action. So we're hearing that loud and clear. The public is behind us to be ambitious, as the mayor said, and to take action. They're behind us with a carbon zero vision, and they want us to be bold and progressive. So I hope that we can respond to that encouragement. There's a lot of interest in increasing density. There's a lot of interest in walkable communities and focusing on infill and transit-oriented development. There's a lot of interest in moving away from fossil fuels and specifically building electrification. And we heard quite a number of comments about retrofitting existing buildings. So I think you'll see that that is well aligned with some of the recommendations that will be coming to you. From the Equity Roundtable, here are a few of the comments that we heard. Key recommendations included investing in existing communities, so we'll want to be really mindful of that as we move forward, and prioritizing low-income households, promoting high-density infill development, and making sure that we're providing incentives so there's an opportunity to participate in some of the greener, more sustainable steps that we're looking at. Community leaders highlighted two key questions, and that was part of our request as the technical advisory committees move forward. We asked them what should they be considering, and they said, we need to have a clear vision for healthy walkable communities. So what does that look like? So walkable should include destinations that are supportive of a healthy, positive future, and that was highlighted as not always being the case. So it's not just about density, but it's really about public health and about the vibrancy and amenities that are associated with that. The other key question was, how do we ensure low-income households receive the benefits of our carbon zero strategies without being overly burdensome? So we'll want to keep coming back to that as one of our key questions as we move forward with these recommendations. So we will continue to think about that and expand on that as we move towards the final report. And we also had the regional survey, as I mentioned. That is still in process. So this is the survey with the Air District and Capital Region Readiness Collaborative. It was translated into 10 languages, and we've received over 1,500 responses so far. So that's going to be a great database. We've pulled some of it already to represent here, but when that closes in June, we'll present the findings at the next meeting. So we're getting a lot of feedback, and people are very interested in sharing their thoughts. And again, we're going to hear from Evan with Valley Vision about what they heard on their survey. So we've got a lot of good information to inform our decisions today. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Ann.
Great. I like the slide with the bullseye, and I hope we hit it.
Take credit for that.
Okay, next I would like to invite Remy Mendoza from the city and Jackie Cole to come up and share more about the city's engagement efforts.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Remy Mendoza with the City of Sacramento, Project Manager for Sacramento 2040, which includes an update of two key long-range planning documents, the city's general plan and the city's climate action plan. Presenting here today is also one of our team members, Jackie Cole with Variable Goods Consulting, an environmental justice and social equity consultant with an emphasis on developing collaboration and engagement with underserved communities. Today, we have a brief presentation that will highlight the Sacramento 2040 timeline, engagement activities, and some of our initial outreach findings. The process and timeline includes 4 main phases of work. In phase 1, which is currently underway, we start out by developing an understanding of the issues and opportunities and defining goals with the community. Next, in phase 2, we explore options and alternatives for achieving these goals and building consensus around a preferred plan. Then in phase 3, we prepare a draft plan with text, graphics, maps, and complete environmental review. The draft plan is put forward for public review and comment. And then finally, in the 4th phase, we refine the plan and formally adopt it through a public hearing process. At each stage of the process, there will be numerous ways for the public to get involved. An essential aspect of our public participation program is to involve as broad and diverse a group of community members and stakeholders as possible. City staff and the consultant team have prepared an outreach strategy that will have multiple opportunities for deliberation and dialogue to encourage participation from all community members, including those that are historically underrepresented communities, youth, and the elderly. Outreach opportunities for the community will include 8 citywide workshops, 20 community plan area workshops, a scientific survey, a telephone town hall, over 15 pop-up events, and online engagement. Our planning team is working very closely with the local government commission to ensure that the community input that is being received will also help inform this commission's work. This slide here shows a calendar of the many outreach events that are occurring during phase 1. We have just wrapped up the citywide workshops at which the local government commission participated in each and every one. The 10 community plan meetings will be underway next, beginning this summer. In phase 2 of our outreach, we will return to the community with a second round of citywide workshops and community plan meetings, as shown on this calendar here. We'll share with the community what we heard from phase 1 and present the options and alternatives for addressing the issues that they identified initially. In phase 3, we'll follow up with the community to receive feedback on the draft general plan and climate action plan and to confirm all previous input. And then in phase 4, we'll assist the audience in interacting with each other and with the city about the final draft general plan and climate action plan. In terms of our initial engagement, we've hosted 3 citywide workshops at which over 100 residents attended. And we also had a Planning Academy alumni workshop for graduates from the last 10 years. The workshops were organized in an open house format. After a brief presentation, participants could complete a workbook and visit a series of stations to interact with staff and consultants to learn about Sacramento today, share with us their vision for Sacramento 2040, and identify issues and opportunities with respect to climate change, mobility, land use, environmental justice, and livability. Some of this community feedback is still being compiled at this time, but we were able to pull some data in regards to the built environment. And these were the top priorities that we heard through the workshops. There's a desire to increase density, provide more housing options, preserve open space, and prioritize low-income community needs. Also worth mentioning that we had a targeted question regarding electric appliances, and 85% of the respondents said that yes, they would consider converting their home to all electric appliances if they didn't cost more and they functioned as well as gas appliances. I'd now like to turn it over to Jackie Cole.
Thank you so much. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about the Environmental Justice Working Group. So I was initially brought on to help the city with their community engagement strategy with underserved populations, specifically as it pertains to a development of an environmental justice element, which all cities and counties across the state of California are responsible for implementing as long as they have an identified disadvantaged community through the CalEnviro screen. And so through this process, what they recognized was that what they needed was a sounding board. And so they asked for some assistance in convening a group of stakeholders that could help them both review some of their community engagement strategies, work on some of the policy development, and then ultimately help them figure out what those EJ communities look like that they need to be conducting that outreach in. The other thing that that group has been tasked with is reviewing the guiding principles for planning overall. The other thing that the city has done is they've agreed to host a space, it's called Doing Environmental Justice. It's a workshop on June 14th. They've invited Carolina Martinez from the Environmental Health Coalition, Dr. Elizabeth Baca from the Governor's Office of OPR, Tiffany Ng from the California Environmental Justice Alliance, Katie Valenzuela and Naila Pope-Harden, who are both community advocates, as well as Christine Vogel from the Department of Justice, specifically the Environmental Justice Bureau, so that we can help create a conversation and a space for a shared understanding of what environmental justice is, what those opportunities look like, and what it means to actually lead with a community-led process. The second event that we'll be hosting is a listening session in July, which is specifically just to start doing some of that relationship building. There's a lot of broken trust in some of our most marginalized and underserved populations. And so there will be no presentations, there will be no dot exercises. It's just an opportunity for the city to start repairing some of those relationships. And then lastly, earlier this month, we hosted an initiatives meeting because we recognize that community engagement fatigue is one of the primary reasons that we aren't able to get the level of participation that we're looking for. And that as we are taking a look at all of the various initiatives and projects that are going on, that there's a lack of alignment and collaboration in how we're gathering all of the data and the information. And insofar as equity is concerned, a lot of these folks are making a pivot towards those communities for the first time, and well, for some of them, probably the first time. So we want to help them develop that strategy by figuring out how they can collaborate and get organized and leverage resources and try to identify what questions are being asked so that we can develop a strategy that works more effectively, specifically for these communities. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. Could you, and then we'll open it up for questions, I guess both of you, tell us what opportunities are there coming up? You mentioned there were some sessions in the summer that commissioners could participate in to come and listen and learn.
Outside of the ones that were just listed?
I think well, Remy, you mentioned there were going to be a series of community meetings? or
Yes, that's correct.
neighborhood meetings?
We have 10 community plan areas within the city of Sacramento, and this summer, in mid-June through August, we'll have a meeting in each community plan area, and so there will be a email blast and notification going out starting tomorrow about each of those events with the dates, times, and location. There will be community plan workshops with exercises for residents to engage and identify community plan specific issues and opportunities.
Great. So I guess we could get an email or some information out to you all on the commission about those events. And hopefully you can go in your neighborhoods too. That'd be fun. Okay, thanks. Questions? Yes, Alberto.
Don't leave yet.
Don't leave. Not so quick.
This is great to hear, and I see a lot of opportunities and intersections in terms of this emphasis on engaging with the community in some of the work that is a new mandate for air agencies like our air district. And I'm specifically talking about AB 617, the Community Air Protection, which we are trying to implement and trying to understand how to reach meaningful engagement and inclusion. And I guess that was my question for you, we learn loud and clear that, reaching out and having meetings is one thing, but is there some lessons that we could take as an air district that is subject to AB 617 with our Community Air Protection Program, and specifically our identified community in South Sacramento, that we should start to think about? And really, this is about an integration into the DNA of how we're going to be doing air quality management and community air protection. I mean, are there some things that you would say, this is meaningful community engagement and inclusion as opposed to just sending an email blast and outreach and information?
Sure. There's a couple of things that come to mind. One is in terms of the format of the event. We know that just having a workshop where folks come to you, you're not going to get some of the folks who there's childcare issues or they're working second jobs and they can't attend. And so we're making a concerted effort to follow up with some monolingual specific outreach event where we go to the community, whether we're working with La Familia, whether community-based organizations or nonprofit organizations. We obtained translation equipment and pop-up event equipment so that we can go where people are and we can provide information in a workshop in their language, and then we can make it a family-friendly event as well. So we have activities for some of the younger folks as well. That's important, being able to translate the materials into different languages, and then partner with trusted nonprofit organizations who can help get the word out on behalf of the city is really helpful also.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, Jackie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for highlighting that, because AB 617 almost specifically dovetails very, very nicely with SB 1000, and I don't think one should be conducted without the other. For the purposes of implementation of SB 1000, the two primary objectives are A, to define what it means to prioritize underserved communities, and then B, to develop a mechanism of community engagement so that we don't have to keep going out. We understand that what's been going on previously isn't working. So what does that mean? And we're all trying to figure it out. Sacramento is one of the first cities, if not the first city, in the state of California that's even taken a crack at this. So it's a learning process, which is why we've invited the stakeholders that we've had to come and have a conversation with us about what they did and what worked. Carolina Martinez and Tiffany Ng were both responsible for authoring a lot of the language in SB 1000, and Carolina specifically was involved in processes where they were working on environmental justice before it was put into California law. So I hope that we see you there so that we can continue to talk about what those opportunities of collaboration look like. We're all figuring out together, and I would love it if we could have a shared definition of what meaningful engagement looks like, of what equity looks like, of what environmental justice is, and how we can do it well.
Great. Thank you both, and we're really appreciative of the opportunity to participate along with you in the city outreach efforts. I think for two reasons. I think it's really important that we work together, and then also that we don't burn out our citizens on duplicative events and demands. So thanks for the cooperation. Okay. I'm missing somebody. Vacant left. Okay, just raise your, I'm sorry, you guys have to raise your hand. Okay, Flo and Mike, sorry. Because not everyone has their own screen, the queue doesn't work. Okay.
Gone. Thank you so much to both of you for your presentation. I think we still have a couple of questions for you. I know you went to sit down, but that's okay. My first one is a technical question. I'm really curious to know, what is a telephone town hall?
That's an opportunity for folks to call in and participate. If they're not able to attend a community meeting physically, we would provide a phone number where they could call in, and we'd have a series of questions in a community dialogue that we could have. So it's sort of a way to kind of fill that gap where folks aren't able to attend a community workshop or maybe not do the scientific survey, but they still would like to call in. So.
Very nice, thank you. And then my second question is, I'm curious to know some of the lessons, building on what Alberto was saying, around the community engagement fatigue, because it seems like we have communities that are on two ends of the spectrum. One's feeling like their brains have, to use the colloquial term, have been picked over and there's nothing left. And then the other side, which is like, hello, does anybody know we exist? And so I'm curious to know how we know where we are in the tipping point for that, and what the strategies are when a community feels like they're over, tapped into, and just kind of having people come in and constantly take things from them, but without a whole lot of reciprocity. And then what we do for a community that feels like no one ever comes out to talk to us and we're completely overlooked.
Yeah, those are great questions. We hope that through our work with the Environmental Justice Working Group and representatives from that community, that we could identify, one, places where people are already gathering. So we're not asking them to attend yet another event or give up additional time that's very precious. So if we go to where they are, then in that sense, we can help with that. And the other is also we are working with other departments, with other agencies across the region to identify what outreach they're doing so that we can piggyback on existing efforts, that they can piggyback on some of our existing efforts. So rather than 3 or 4 different departments or agencies coming out to a community within a week, it could just be one as a team that we come out and have various stations where folks can interact and we could have those important dialogues that are necessary.
And recognizing where, environmental justice communities in particular have, a lot of community engagement fatigue and a lot of broken trust just in general. The impetus for the EJ working group was around creating some more thought and some more deliberate intention about how we wanted to actually execute that. So initially, I was brought on to build a strategy for community engagement, and I was prepared to be very happy with that. But they also decided that they wanted to put together a working group so that they had an active sounding board to provide feedback for them about how they should be identifying these communities, who those gatekeepers and community ambassadors are, who those cultural brokers are, so that, from the work that I've done out in the community, I can give a certain level of feedback about who's really active and who's kind of tapering off. And then talking to some of those folks about what we need to do in order to get participation from the folks that feel like they just, like the government isn't here for them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that, to piggyback on the point about building trust, Jackie and I have been doing a series of coffee meetups throughout the community with some community leaders to help us address some of these issues and concerns, because it is, a very big issue that's come up, and we do want to have the community engagement to be as meaningful as possible. So the more we can learn from folks and hear about what those concerns are and address them at the front end, I think that'll be more helpful.
Thank you.
Mike Teal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The appropriate time today, thank you, to address this question, but this is a mayor's, plural, Commission, and it does involve the city of West Sacramento. And at some point, I'd kind of like to hear what is the city of West Sacramento doing for community engagement, and how they made progress on building a business roundtable to provide input into this also.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Mike, and it is good feedback, because I'm sitting back listening to this presentation, and I know our city staff has been working on climate change and action plans for the last 10 years. So I'll be happy to kind of give you an update at the next one and talk offline as well about how we can engage you and the chamber in some of the future ones we have coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I would just add to that, we do work closely with a staff member who works on sustainability for West Sac, and what she's told us is that West Sac really isn't as far along in their current cycle of working on their climate action plan, so they're just slightly behind this process, a little bit. So we'll try to have a report at the next meeting, but it's a good thing to keep on top of. Thanks, Mike. Okay, anyone else? All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
Going once.
Yeah. Okay, next we are going to hear a presentation about the youth summit that we had in April at Sac State, and I turn it over to Julia. She spearheaded it and will coordinate the presentation.
In cooperation with the outstanding students from Sac State. So since the last Climate Commission meeting, Sac State and Dr. Nelson's team held a youth summit at Sac State April 10th. It was beyond what we had expected in terms of both quality and quantity of input, thanks to the outstanding leadership, in particular of Moise Murr, who will speak in just a second, and facilitation by Craig Coppin, who will also speak in just a second. They're going to go over the numbers, and I want them to take that praise when we get to that. But just a couple parts. I want to thank the climate commissions who attended, Meg, April, and Lori, and of course, Dr. Nelson. Your office was just so helpful with logistics. We bookended the day by having both mayors. So Mayor Steinberg welcomed the students in the auditorium, and Mayor Cabaldon closed out the last facilitation session. Helena, Julia, and Kate also attended and helped, and Helena and team put together a video starring a couple of our students and Rachel Dalporto, who was the executive vice president of the Associated Students. She's doing an internship at Virginia Tech. She's a civil engineering major and had time to run for office and basically be the liaison for this event. So she's already left to go back to Virginia, but you'll see her on the video, which we will show right now.
Vision for a sustainable future for Sacramento and West Sacramento would be a lot more transportation, public transportation for folks to take that is more sustainable, more green, and more equitable, so all folks can take it and can get from different parts of town to where they need to go.
It would be nice to see Sacramento shift cultures to a more public transportation friendly city.
So my vision for Sacramento and West Sacramento actually isn't to be carbon neutral by 2045, it's to be carbon negative by 2045.
To have a city that develops towards being carbon neutral and carbon zero, while also taking into account equity.
I see more community gardens, more urban areas for people to sit and talk and be out in nature.
I believe that we need to start investing in the technology, so having student-led research programs.
We should probably be the renewable energy leader for California or for our region.
So the one thing I pledge to do to make sure that we get to a sustainable future is to continue advocating for that change in both our local and state government.
Every decision that I make in my engineering career, I pledge to think about the environmental impact.
So I've actually decided that I'm going to go work in sustainability for my career. So I pledge to basically devote my career to it.
Continue to be engaged in activism and local organizations, working with the Environmental Student Organization here at Sac State, working with the Sacramento Tree Foundation.
I pledge to use more public transportation and not drive my car as often.
If there's a greener option or more environmentally friendly option, to take that.
I guess share this topic with friends and people who I have conversations with. Just make it an important thing for others to know.
Try to find the best options to be the best sustainable city.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
That's a good ending. In addition to the cameo appearances, the day included 4 different timed breakout sessions, 90 minutes each, 7 different topics per each session. And we had a facilitator training the Saturday before the meeting where we did an hour facilitator training. Craig, that's when I met Craig, front and center, and he facilitated all day long for us. So we adopted him. He's now part of our Climate Commission student corps, along with Moise Murr, who just graduated from Sac State. So he is one of the hands that Dr. Nelson shook a Saturday ago or Sunday ago. And I welcome both of you up to give your reflections on the day.
Hello. So I'd just like to start by saying that as students, we were so glad that the Mayor's Commission reached out to us for student input, taking the initiative of transparency to involve the community in this endeavor. At the summit, we had over 250 students attend throughout the day, ranging all the way from UC Davis to Folsom Lake College. We invited students from every single college in the Sacramento region. And actually, following the summit, a small group of the students that participated wrote letters addressed to the commission and the mayors that I like to add to the record after my comments. So the big thing that I heard students talk about was equity as we changed Sacramento to address climate change and the other issues we face as a city, including homelessness, affordable housing, and conserving our wild habitats. One way that we can accomplish this is by creating more partnerships with the city and community-oriented organizations to expand the programs that they provide. So just a few examples I mentioned in the video, the Sacramento Tree Foundation is already working with the city of Sacramento and partnered with them to have programs to increase our urban forest to communities where trees are lacking. In the area of renewables, groups like Grid Alternatives, which already provide solar for low-income communities, as well as renewable job training programs that we need to expand and support. In the area of land use and community design, Soil-Borne Farms works to minimize the concern we need to address of Sacramento's food deserts while providing employment, training, and community education, as well as fresh produce through local urban sustainable agriculture. And now I'd like to invite Craig to come speak.
So really quickly referencing the video again, you did hear it right. I do believe that we should not only be carbon neutral, but carbon negative by 2045. I am one of those that wants to speed it up and probably be carbon neutral by 2030 if we can. I wanted to say, Julia, thank you. I would have attended all 7 if I could. So going back to the summit, the number one takeaway that I actually had was that the students that were there were not environmental studies students. They weren't trying to actually study this stuff for their careers. They took their passions and other things, like mine is in business, for example, and they decided to try to apply that to environmental science. So I would strongly urge you to possibly have your free open seat go to a student that is trying to lead this and trying to work in this as much as possible. So whether that be through offering paid internships or entry-level jobs, I feel like that would be a great step towards getting the younger, more aggressive person into this climate change fight as well. So there were a few things that I'm going to be talking about. The first one is water. According to the UN Water Agency, in 9 years, 2/3 of the world population will be living in stressed water conditions. meaning they have to cut back on showers or not take them. They have to probably not wash their dishes or clothes as often, and the worst being that they would have to walk to find water. I feel like we should include that in our climate change talk as well, since it is inevitable and the timeline is a little faster. Also, we are going to try, hopefully, to phase out single-use plastics in this city by just an example, going to the businesses and telling them that they need to cut back or they're going to be taxed more, like Costco or Walmart or something that has the power to do that. Also, we are going to be talking really quickly about the transportation here. In the summit, I heard a lot about offering cheaper electric vehicles and more incentives for those, whether it be free parking spots that charge your electric vehicle or changing the grid actually to include a lot more parking spaces on the street to include the electric vehicles for free as well. So with that, I yield my time. Yeah.
Thank you both so much for participating in April with us and for speaking tonight. We know that you're taking time from your busy schedules to do that. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you again, Dr. Nelson, for educating our student leaders of the future. We took the commission on the road and they exceeded our expectations. Many, many thanks to you. And with that.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to both of you and all your colleagues that helped put it together. It was really inspiring to be there. Questions? Yes. Mr. Nelson.
You educate me. I don't educate you. So I'm proud of you. Thank you for being involved. And let's just keep spreading it, and let's make Sac State and all of the students here. And I endorse the idea of having a student on this commission.
So the input that they submitted has been, I think, is being typed by the local government commission. They also kept a Google survey open longer for those that couldn't participate. And then, as you saw, we had some class projects come in. So all of that input will be included in the commission's work.
Great, fantastic. Thank you both. Okay, next, this is the last piece on our communications agenda, is to hear from Evan Schmidt from Valley Vision on the results of your survey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Great. Well, I'm Evan Schmidt. I'm the Senior Director of Valley Vision, and I also lead our public opinion polling series that we do. And the most recent one that we did was on the environment, so that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. First, I want to acknowledge the contributions of some of you all up here. Meg Arnold, my colleague at Valley Vision, also a contributor to the report, who lent a lot of content expertise. Sac State is also our partner in the project with the Institute for Social Research, administering the surveys and providing their expertise as social scientists, and then the Sac Metro Air District helping support the effort, along with the Sierra Health Foundation and Western Health Advantage. So I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about some of the main findings that I think are most relevant to you. Before I do, I'll just tell you a little bit about the survey. This survey was out in the field in December 2018, so just a few months ago. It went out to just under 1,000 residents across the 8-county region. So that makes up the 6-county SACOG region and San Joaquin and Solano counties as well. This is a scientifically valid, demographically representative survey, and we have a margin of error plus or minus 3%. So the goal really is to make sure we have a survey that represents the people of the region as a whole, and we have confidence this one does. So one of the first things that we learned in the survey is that people really care strongly for the environment. This wasn't a big surprise, but the level of intensity that people brought to this was a big surprise. And so we saw numbers like 90% of people saying that that it's very important or essential to have a clean environment. So that was a more intense result than we've gotten in some of our other surveys. And although people are really, the clean environment's really important to people, they also have a lot of concerns about the environment. And so we had 70% of people saying that at least one type of pollution is a concern in their community. And the different things they were asked about was water pollution, air quality, and soil pollution. Air quality came out as the most significant concern, with 88% of people noting that they have concerns about air quality in their community. One thing that we learned, we asked a lot of questions about climate change, and we learned that the majority of the residents in our region really believe that humans have caused climate change and that it's already happening. So we saw 88% of people seeing that humans had a causal relationship to climate change. And we also, this was one of the topics that we were really interested in politically, to see across the political spectrum what people thought about this, because in national politics, it's often thought of as a very divisive issue. And so even when you looked at it politically, we saw the vast majority of people believe that humans have caused climate change. So 3 out of 4 Republicans believe that humans have caused climate change, and over 90% of Democrats and over 90% of independents also believe that. We asked a lot of questions about climate risks. So thinking about the effects that climate change will have on our communities, what have they already experienced, and what are they most concerned about in the future? So 79% of people believe that their community is at risk of the effects of climate change. And these effects include like smoke in the air from wildfires, drought, hotter temperatures, and flooding. And just to make a note about smoke in the air from wildfires, this survey was out in December 2018, which was just a few weeks after the Camp Fire. And so that was something that was really fresh in people's mind. And we had almost 90% of people saying that this was something they had experienced and that they're very concerned about in the future. So that kind of exemplifies how it's a good idea to do these polls more than once, which we plan to do with this poll, so that we can understand how people's views might change over time. And so likewise, people talked about how climate change has affected them in the past. So 91% of the respondents reported that at least one of those items had affected them. And like I said, a lot of those were reacting to wildfire smoke. And then asking about the future, if people are concerned how climate change will affect them. And we asked across a spectrum of questions, how will it affect economic vitality in their community? How will it affect quality of life, et cetera? And the number one thing that people were worried about was just well-being in general. So people had a lot of concerns about the well-being of future generations in the face of climate change. We asked questions about land use, and we wanted to understand more about how people feel about the preservation of open spaces, including wild spaces, farmland, and open space in general. So the majority of people were in favor of preserving open space, wild spaces, and farmland. And we asked a lot of trade-off questions about, would you rather preserve these different types of spaces or build housing? And would you rather preserve these different types of spaces or build office and retail? So when we asked those types of questions, the majority still were in favor of preserving open space, especially as it compared to retail and office areas. So here it says 84% prefer preserving these spaces, but it was at least 84%. It went all the way up to 89%, I believe, when setting it up against wild spaces. Another thing we wanted to understand was what do people think about the relationship between the environment and the economy, and do they see that as a trade-off? So either one's doing well or the other's doing well. And what we found is that's really not the case. People in our region see the environment and economic growth as very compatible and do not see them in opposition to each other. So we had 66% of our respondents say that climate change reduction efforts will not impact jobs or will result in more jobs. And the way that actually broke down is that 44% said that they think it would result in more jobs, while 22% said it won't affect the amount of jobs. And so overall, that's a really positive message about what people think about reducing climate change as it relates to job growth. 77% think that environmental regulations are beneficial to the quality of life, and it was a very similar number looking at economic prosperity as well. 50% think it's important to take action and do so in a way that supports rather than damages job growth in the economy. For this question, there was kind of 3 gradients that you could respond to. The most intense one was that state and local government should do whatever it takes to support the environment. And we actually had 41% of people who chose that option. And then we had 50% of people saying, yes, we should take action, but we should do it in a way that protects job growth. So when you look at that overall, it's a very positive profile of how people are thinking about the way we're taking action on the environment. And then only 9% of people chose this option, that environmental laws and regulations cost too many jobs and hurt the economy. So it was really a minority of the population who felt that way. We asked people what kind of actions do they want from the government, from business, and from themselves. And we found that over that whole spectrum, people really want more action. So in this slide, we're addressing the government, and people generally think the government should be doing more. So 85% think that the government should do more to protect the environment. 50% believe that the government should do more to reduce global climate change, but I want to contextualize that a little bit. The options were the government should do more, the government's doing the right amount, or the government should do less. So for this one, 50% said that they should do more, and there was only one option where more people thought the government should do more, and that was managing forests. And then we had, I think it was around 31% who said the government's doing the right amount. So when you look at that whole profile, again, it's very positive in terms of the role that people think the government should play on climate change. And 96% support the expansion of solar and wind energy sourcing. And so we asked we gave a number of different options about energy sourcing and asked people's opinions about expanding those sources of energy. And for these 2 renewable options, which were the only 2 renewable options that we offered, it was much, much more support, double, triple the amount when you looked at things, when you looked at more conventional energy sourcing like coal and oil and things like that. So this was just a snapshot of the findings because we don't have a long time to talk right now, but I did want to direct you to the website where you can download the full report with much more that's in there. And, you know, I was thinking about kind of maybe some of the key takeaways for this commission. I think that the regional residents really believe that climate change is happening and that it's human caused. Residents support action by government, business, and individuals to protect the environment and to address climate change, and they really overwhelmingly do so. Residents do not see economic growth and the environment at odds. And residents are very much in favor of preserving open space, farmland, and wildlands. And just to kind of summarize what the survey is here in my last slide, this just gives you kind of an overview of what we were looking for, what our method was, and the information about the responses. Then you can see all of our public opinion polling on our website, and the other public opinion polls that we put out there have been on livability, on civic amenities, and transportation. And we're really starting to see a lot of crossover against these surveys, or across these surveys, and a lot of topics that, you know, there's plenty of environmental topics that are coming up in our transportation survey and our livability survey. So I think we're really looking forward to the different ways that we can cross-reference these and understand more dimensions about how people are thinking about these different elements. But that's all I have to share with you today. Certainly contact me with any questions. Thank you so much for having me, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Evan. Questions? Okay, looks like not. Thank you. Very informative, and thanks for all your work.
Thanks.
Kate. Kate, who has studied all of this, is going to give us a few takeaways.
Helena's going to pull up a slide for us. So I know that was a lot of information, and thank you so much, everyone, for presenting that information and participating in the engagement processes to compile that information. But I want to take it back to what we're talking about specifically today, which is the built environment recommendations. So in looking at all of what's been presented today, here were our 5 takeaways that we thought most specifically related to the strategies we'll be discussing today. So we heard loud and clear that the community wants walkable communities, that there was a desire to preserve open space, to create affordable housing, to electrify buildings, and invest in energy efficiency and renewables. So those were some of the big pieces that I think will relate really well to what we hear from the TAC on their recommendations and what we should be thinking about as we move towards voting on these. I will say that the input that we receive that doesn't relate specifically to that, we'll want to continue to bring that back as we move forward and start talking about mobility and health and resiliency. So just know that we now have this treasure chest of public feedback and information, and we can refer to that as we move forward.
Great, thank you, Kate, and all the presenters. So at our last commission meeting, the feedback from the commission was we want to hear from the communities and get more input and engagement. I hope we kind of hit the mark. If you have any feedback, please share now or later. We thought about, for the future, we want to do a standing item on the input and engagement that we're doing. I don't think it'll always be this long. We're kind of caught up now, if you will, but we plan to have this as a standing item. So any feedback or questions? All right, we are close to on schedule. Thank you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is move into the big topic for the day, other big topic, carbon zero strategies for the built environment. Kate, I guess it's back to you.
So I'll just
to
provide
introduce
some brief context for the presenters that are going to share their recommendations, the actual TAC members. So just wanted you all to be aware that we had really robust participation in this TAC. So we had 50 experts and leaders representing regional agencies, nonprofits, utilities, developers, architects, realtors, and land use and energy sectors. So there's a lot of feedback and expertise that went into what you're going to hear presented from our three speakers. As I previously stated, the commission asked that the TAC really focus and prioritize, and so you'll hear just 3 top strategies that are recommended, followed with some implementation steps that are associated with those. Beyond kind of the high overarching strategies, I want to acknowledge that a part of that conversation, both with the TAC and then also with the equity roundtables, is making sure that we have an ongoing process as we look at all of these to track equity, to look at anti-displacement policies, and to ensure that we're serving our underrepresented neighborhoods. So if that doesn't come across loud and clear as the strategies are presenting, just know that that was a big part of the conversation and will be a part of our intent moving into the final recommendations. Another key component will be the education and outreach, so that'll be important for all of our strategies from built environment and as we move into mobility as well. We know that engaging the public, not just in this input and feedback process, but also as we move forward, helping them understand what opportunities might present themselves through these recommendations. So that'll be a big part of what we're doing. So what we'll hear is the 2 key themes that came out of the TAC meetings, which are focusing on growth within already existing developed areas, and then building electrification. So we'll hear from our presenters. And this is something I'll just say, I just returned from Germany, where I was part of the U.S. delegation for an international climate conference, and I will say that all across the world, these are the key strategies related to the built environment. So I think we're very much in line with what the global community is doing on climate change. So with that, I think we're going to turn it over to our first presenter to provide some context on electrification. And do you want to introduce?
Yes, and that's Scott Blanc. Scott heads at SMUD, Long Range Planning for Electrification and Energy Efficiency, but I learned he's a mechanical engineer, a general contractor, a real estate broker, and a West Sac resident.
Go West Sac.
Yay, West Sac. So Scott's presentation is to provide context on a study that SMUD did around cost effectiveness on electrification. So he's presenting, his report will provide context for the strategies that we'll subsequently hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for having me here today. Appreciate the time. All right. So building electrification, there's so many benefits. It seems like this should be happening without any influence, but it's not at the time. Because right out of the gate, it's going to reduce customers' energy bills, which I'll talk more about. We're going to be keeping any of the jobs local. It's going to improve indoor air quality in your homes, in the buildings. You're no longer burning fossil fuels inside your home, inside your kitchen. And then what you don't burn inside your kitchen, you burn and exhaust out the roof of your house. So you're cleaning up your neighborhood at the same time. Because we're selling more electricity, it's going to have downward pressure on electric rates. And just the bottom line is there's less carbon pollution. We like to call it carbon emissions. It's just pollution, though, is what it really is. And then it should also reduce the cost of housing, at least reduce the cost to construct housing. And so when we talk about electrification, a lot of times people immediately go to electric cars, thanks to Elon Musk. He's brought it into the spotlight. And maybe you're looking at a nice commuter car from BMW, or a really cool four-wheel drive pickup truck from Rivian that'll be coming out soon, or a Harley if you want an electric motorcycle. But it's going to be powered by clean energy, and we want your home to be powered by clean energy too. Every home that's electrified is the carbon equivalent of one vehicle. So where this pollution is coming from, the carbon being emitted, there's more being burnt in our buildings than in all of the gas power plants, the gas plants that produce electricity in the state. And so 60%, so a lot of times the argument is, well, you burn gas in the plant, so why don't I just burn it in my home instead? The counter to that is for SMUD's electricity, 60% of that is carbon-free already, and it's getting cleaner every day. And PG&E right now is around 75 or 80% carbon-free. So already most of the electricity that's consumed is already carbon-free. But SB 100 also has SB 100 that came out last year is 60% renewable energy by 2030, which this is a different renewable energy than the carbon-free energy, unfortunately. And then the 100% carbon-free by 2045. So every year, the electricity sector is getting cleaner. And so essentially, this shows carbon savings now and over a few snapshots ahead. So this would be equivalent to SMUD, but it's also very similar to what it would be in West Sacramento territory, so Sacramento, West Sacramento. So just electrifying today, you're going to cut your carbon pollution in half, and then as the grid gets cleaner, you pollute less. And so what this is also factoring in, which is some of the first stuff we've seen, is the emissions from leaking gas, methane, natural gas, if you will, but methane. When it leaks into the environment, it's 84 times more harmful to the environment than if we burn it. So methane leaks or natural gas leaks is an important piece of global warming. The other piece is refrigerants. We used to have a hole in the ozone. We went away from those, and now the refrigerants are greenhouse gas. So those will be switched away too. So this factors in both of those pieces. I'll leave it at that for now. And last fall, SMUD adopted its integrated resource plan. And what that is it's a long-term look at how we're going to power Sacramento. And the main focus was to maximize the local benefits. And those came out, the two key strategies was to do building electrification and vehicle electrification and carbon-free energy sources. And to the tune of, the board approved a $1.7 billion investment plan over the next 21 years. So roughly $50 million a year on top of what was already planned to be spent. So SMUD is committed. We're in this for the long haul, and we think it's good for our region. And right now, what we've been focused on is residential, and that's strictly because residential 70 or 83%, I can't read that, I left my glasses over there. Anyway, about 83% of all the gas used in space heating and water heating right now is in residential, either single family, which is the big piece of the pie, or multifamily is the red piece. So the single family market is very homogeneous, where the commercial segment, it's scattered through a lot of different end uses. So that's why the focus on residential at the moment. And heat pumps are going to be a part of our future. And know it or not, you all have a heat pump in your house, probably 2 or 3 of them. Your air conditioner is a heat pump. It just runs one direction. If you wanted it to heat your house, you'd have to have it run the other direction. Your refrigerator is a heat pump. We don't call them heat pumps. They have these catchy names, like refrigerator, as opposed to a heat pump food cooler. But it's a heat pump. And I say that because it's not a new technology. It's tried, it's trusted. We don't think about a refrigerator breaking down every day or seldom, right? And so for single-family new construction, this is REACH code analysis. This is the difference between building all electric and building a typical mixed fuel home under SMUDS rates, and I'll talk a moment under PG&E rates. But what the box on the far left, the EDR reduced is 0, which means it just minimally meets code. The 0 in the PV size means no extra PV is necessary. The next 2 columns are the carbon, and so roughly about half the carbon will be emitted by just building to code, doing nothing extra, just building to all electric to code. The next, for every home, it'll save $5,349 by not putting in the gas infrastructure. That's kind of a middle of the road estimate. I've seen them as high as $10,000, $15,000 a home. And then less expensive to operate. So that's on an annual basis, roughly $5 a month less to operate. Other studies, there's two studies. This is the more conservative one. But anyway, it's cheaper to build, it's cheaper to operate, it's better for the environment, it pollutes less, and it's just, we're asking them only to build to code all electric. Seems like a no-brainer. And so for the city of Sacramento, and I apologize I didn't do it for the West Sacramento, but for each year an all-electric code is delayed, these are the impacts. About 1,005 additional tons of carbon pollution will be emitted. Higher construction costs of about $15.4 million, and higher operating costs to our residents of about $1.7 million. So that's per year delay of this code. Plus, we're just polluting our neighborhoods and our homes the longer we keep gas in them. And and just a loss of awareness around existing buildings. If we can make this in new construction, it's setting a signal for the existing buildings that are out there. And so for this is another study that was recently done, and it just shows the cost effectiveness in so SMUD is the yellow one, or the dots on the far, on the very high piece of that. So the middle column shows existing buildings, and the range for existing buildings is around $600 savings per year. This has slightly higher standard of equipment. It's the previous slide showed the worst type equipment you could legally install. This had like middle of the road, so the savings are bigger. But in new construction, it's about $400 savings. And that's it. Good at that. Questions?
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I have lots of questions, but I won't ask them all now. One of the things that you talked about is that SMUD has 60% carbon-free energy. That's 40% that is burning fossil fuels, right?
That's correct.
So even if we electrify, that means that we're still using electric energy that is full of fossil fuels. what can we do to speed up that transition to carbon zero for the electricity?
Well, I mean, I think it's what we've done in the IRP is a balanced approach, and we can't do everything all at once. So, it's a very positive story for the building owner to electrify right now in terms of carbon savings, in terms of bill savings, in terms of all of that, because of the efficiency of the equipment that goes in. What can we do to speed up the decarbonization of the electric sector? It is underway. I'm just not here I don't know that side of our business very well, so I can't speak well on it. But we do have a plan in place to decrease that every year moving forward.
Right, but it's only following the state mandate rather than taking bold steps and going much faster and decarbonizing by, say, 2030, which is, according to the scientific studies, we need to get to that point by 2030.
Well, I know that during the IRP process that was looked at, and it was feasible to move faster in that direction, but we would have been building renewables outside of our territory and bringing them into the grid. And this approach allowed all of the benefits to local air quality, to bill savings, to be much more localized into our communities. And we felt or SMUD felt that was the right decision at the time.
So are we making decisions for the climate, or we're just making incremental decisions that seem Okay, Arlen.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
If I could. So SMUD's integrated resource plan, what you saw was the work of nearly $2 billion of investment in electrification. The other part of that is more than $4 billion of investment in the next 20 years in reducing our carbon footprint, and most of that is an investment in new renewables. 1,500 megawatts of solar located within the Sacramento region, and about 500 megawatts of storage to help integrate that. So altogether, our investment strategy to reduce our carbon footprint over time is about $7 billion. And Lori, I know you were very active in those discussions and pushed our board to do more. This was the balance that our board struck between our interest in reducing carbon and the cost impacts to our customers. So I know you continue to disagree and believe our board should have done more, but that's kind of the outlie that we did on reaching our carbon goals.
Thanks, Arlen. Flo?
Thank you so much. This was a great presentation, and I apologize for stepping out at the beginning. My heat pump, AKA my refrigerator, was being delivered, and it was 45 minutes late, and of course there were problems with the install. So I apologize for stepping out twice and for being on my phone. There was a lot going on in my life. So I missed the beginning of your presentation, and there may have been a part where you talked about this, but I'm gonna put on my equity hat and ask the question that I think has to be asked, which is that, we've been talking today about what's going on in communities, and in particular community engagement and prioritizing low-income communities. And so when I see your presentation, I think, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Every possible homeowner in the region would think, why wouldn't I electrify? I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. What about the renters, who are often our low-income folks, who could benefit from the cost savings associated with electrification and with the cost savings of going solar, but do not have the ability to make that call? And so I'm really curious what we're gonna do, because a lot of people in our region are renting, and what we're going to do about incentivizing this in a way, and maybe this is also a question to Arlen as well, about incentivizing this where the cost savings are gonna go to the consumer who runs their own SMUD in the house or in the unit, where somebody else owns the building and so is going to have to take on some of those upfront costs. And so just really trying to figure out what we do to incentivize so this does not end up being like the lead abatement program, where everybody who owned their home abated their lead and everybody who was renting was still getting lead poisoning. So that's the big, equity issue that I'm really concerned about right now, is how do we translate the cost savings for people who are renting? Because I know a lot of renters who would love to have solar and would love to be able to electrify their homes.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to chime in for a second. Great question, Flo. Obadiah, is this something that'll be covered or more appropriate for you guys in your presentation?
Yeah, we can try and take a shot at tackling it.
Because they're going to talk about the strategies and the implementation. So
Awesome.
we won't
Okay.
forget you. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott, you're off the hook.
Yes, I'm cost effective. I'm cost effectiveness, so.
All right. Yes, Chris.
Thank you. And if you can go back on your slides, because I want to make sure I capture early on, I want to make sure I understood, one of your slides talked about the amount of emissions coming from residential contributors. So
Sure.
there's this that shows new construction, if you go back.
That
here.
one?
So that's what I'm trying to get a sense
Yep.
of is kind of what are we talking about in terms of the larger scheme of where our emissions come from. So, so you're basically taking the 7% of emissions from residential and would be commercial buildings as well, I'm assuming. So electrification you're talking about is within, would kind of mitigate that 7% emission from the residential. Is that sort of, am I thinking about that the right way?
Yeah, I think that's the right way to think about it. Like right now we're focusing on that 7% to residential. In a year or two, very soon we're going to start working more on the commercial piece of that as well, and shrinking that piece of the pie. And then SMUD also has and PG&E also has its plans to be shrinking its piece, the 10% up there. And I showed this to somebody and they said, well, transportation's the problem. And like, all I could say to them is, yes, they're bigger than us.
It's an and. It's a yes and that too, right?
Well, there's other people out there that are very smart, working on transportation. Like, I'm buildings, and this is, I'm working on buildings.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood because, look, I understand I do have a second question here, but I understand where you're going. I just want to understand this kind of in context of what are we talking about. This, I'm not opposing what you were saying.
Yeah.
Because I have to think about, which is the second part of my question is, I've got to believe PG&E's numbers are relatively the same, being where under
this is a
PG&E's,
statewide,
that this is, would you agree, and maybe Arlen can chime in, that principally this would be, you couldn't exact dollars, but principally PG&E savings would be the same for a developer or a consumer seeing those savings? Would that be I mean, I hate to pin you to their numbers, but
Yes, and at least in the West Sac and their climate zone, there's the same dollar savings for developers building housing. So in multifamily and single family, there's the same dollar savings there. Their on-bill savings are less. It's between an on-bill raising their bills by $15 and lowering it by $30. It's in that bandwidth somewhere, so it's right around zero. Was that addressing your
I just want to
question?
make sure that conceptually that I'm thinking about that the same way too, because they're not part of the conversation. At least I know they're part of the environment. I'm not sure if anybody from PG&E is here wants to speak at that. Maybe they want to address it too. And when they speak. But again, I just want to make sure I understand conceptually it would apply in Yellow County as well as as you applied it.
Yeah, it would, very, very close, very similar.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Anyone else? All right, thanks. Thank you very much. Scott, is the whole report public?
Yes.
On your website,
Happy
SMUD's
to share
website.
the report, yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is now we'll move to the actual recommendations from the TAC on the strategies. Obadiah is going to kind of walk us through that presentation. There are 3 strategies. After each presentation, we'll have questions from the commissioners. Then we'll have public comment. I think I have about 20 minutes worth so far. Folks signed up. Please make sure you've turned in your card if you want to speak on this item. And then after the public comment, we'll move to a commission discussion and hopefully a motion and action. All right, Obadiah.
Fantastic. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and present the recommendations from the Technical Advisory Committee. What I am presenting, as Kate mentioned, is a significantly boiled down and prioritized list of the top 3 most impactful strategies that are bold enough and that are really essential to meeting the 2045 carbon zero mandate. Let me just click through a few of Scott's slides here.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm going to go to another version of that pie chart that's Sacramento. So yeah, just for context, I know Scott got into this a little bit, but these are the emission sources in the Sacramento region as part of our regional footprint for the city of Sacramento in blue and city of West Sacramento in green. They mirror to a great extent the pie chart Scott was just speaking about, with transportation being the largest share and buildings between residential and commercial representing about 35 to 40% of the total emissions, with electricity being a little bit more than half of that share. As Scott mentioned and was mentioned earlier, we will be taking that share down to 0 by 2045, so consistent with the level of ambition of the mayor's objectives. The remaining share is natural gas, which as of yet, we've struggled to identify cost-effective solutions within the gas sector when looking at renewable gas. The statewide analyses that have been done have come up far short in terms of resource potential and really orders of magnitude higher cost to try and address this building sector with those resources. So that's really why we're here talking about building electrification, why state policymakers are talking about building electrification as a key strategy. So I'm going to be talking about these three strategies. Actually, we'll have David up here as well as Kelly Cunningham from PG&E. David Mogavero will be speaking to the regional urban growth boundaries. And then I'll be sharing some presentation with Kelly on mandating all electric new construction and electrifying existing buildings. Those are really what we saw as the three most impactful strategies that came out of the multiple TAC meetings we had with the set of experts that Kate mentioned toward meeting this carbon zero mandate. There were two additional recommendations that the TAC felt pretty strongly were quite important for consideration, but couldn't fit within the top three. Those were the urban forestry and green space, which, as was mentioned, is being proposed to be moved for consideration in the community health and resilience TAC. And the, as well, EV infrastructure was featured quite a bit in our strategies. And ultimately, while that is a critical strategy and relates to the built environment, there's also a relationship to the mobility TAC and a feeling that that needs to be thought about comprehensively in the mobility strategies to think about the role and location and type of charging that's necessary as we balance that with other transportation modes. So given that, I'm going to invite David up here to present the first strategy.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. I had the good fortune last month of spending nearly a week in Copenhagen, and I'm sort of going to kick off with some comments about that. One of the interesting things about Copenhagen is that 50% of the trips in Copenhagen are by bicycle. Very impressive in a cold climate in particular. They've done lots of programs, they've done lots of infrastructure improvements to facilitate that, but the most critical ingredient has been that they had a pre-existing urban form that accommodated that approach to getting around and connecting people with all of the things they need to do every day. They've had aggressive limits on where they allocate their precious real estate investment so that the essentials of daily life are proximate. They don't use the American model of low-density sprawl development that sucks economic resources out of our existing neighborhoods besides exacerbating our environmental challenges. Besides being the most powerful and lowest cost of all of the strategies that you're going to hear in this process, by far, this strategy also has a multitude of co-benefits as well. The handout that Helen's going to pass out has some of that on it, and I think there's a slide that summarizes that. Such as lowering the cost of living. Automobiles cost the average family $10,000 a year. Most of them in Sacramento have two. Significant percentage of average household income goes into owning cars, not to mention many other economic parameters. It enhances health. People that live in dense urban areas are less obese, and you have huge costs that come from automobile accidents. It lowers the cost of governance. The amount of infrastructure per dollar of taxes collected that has to be maintained is vastly lower. It's a simple business principle that when you lower your cost, you improve your bottom line as well. It enhances transit viability because you have more people that are living at the stations. And most importantly to me, we're growing kids that are more independent and learn how to take care of themselves at a younger age. That's just to name a few. The fact is that what I heard today was that all of your community outreach is reinforcing this point over and over and over again, and I'm thankful that that reinforcement is happening. In our region, we have vast amounts of underutilized land. Folsom Boulevard has a light rail line, the entire length of it, with empty parking lot after empty parking lot after empty parking lot. Citrus Heights could use a downtown. Why don't we redevelop the Sunrise Mall area into having a real downtown? There are places like Franklin Boulevard and West Capitol Avenue and Stockton Boulevard and Elk Grove Boulevard that all have vast amounts of unused land that we can use to infill and put development on. It just so happens that many of those coincide with transit resources as well. It's my personal belief that we could triple the population in Sacramento without rezoning 1 square inch of new land. So some evidence that there's change going on. One is about 10 to 15% of new housing starts are happening in infill areas. Before the recession, it was more like 2 or 3%. So the market is finally starting to respond to the demand that's out there. There's changing business models, and I'm going to look at Mr. Teal here. The Market 515 brand is excellent in terms of responding and correlating with this approach to changing our community. So we've known that urban sprawl has these deleterious effects for decades, literally decades. And we haven't done anything about it, I think because of the challenging politics, which I'm sure you're going to hear about today, and that the biggest challenge is that there's not the immediate payoff. We're always focused on things like tailpipe emissions, where we can get results in 2 or 3 years, but the fact is we don't get to where we need to go without land use change. As a result, once again, we see transportation emissions rising. In Los Angeles, VMT's going up as well as continuing to go up, but emissions that were dropping are now starting to climb again. Why? Because we've exhausted the capacity of tailpipe emission reductions and, for that matter, EV conversions as well. So imagine if ARB 30 or 40 years ago had said, we're going to focus on land use instead of tailpipe emissions and do something about it. So this is a regional strategy, but there's got to be leadership finally and in the future from somebody, and you're here today to take that leadership. I think it's much more than my opinion that if this effort doesn't address sprawl, then the amount of effort that you've put into this is not going to have as much value as if you did otherwise. So thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, now is the time to ask David questions, keeping in mind that we'll have the bigger discussion on the merits after we hear from all the strategies. Okay, so questions for David. Lori?
David, you mentioned something about changing, I can't remember where you were talking about, but is it possible to change the suburbs like Carmichael and those kinds of places and make them into cities, walkable cities? Is that a doable thing?
Absolutely. It's happening all over the United States right now. And that is our biggest opportunity. When we talk about infill in Sacramento, we're typically focused on the central city, but 20,000 new dwelling units, maybe 30, what's that, 2 years of growth or something like that? The fact is that we have resources all over the region, in the county, in Elk Grove, in Citrus Heights, all of those places have opportunities to increase density and reinvigorate neighborhoods. The nice thing that you do when you start building in those existing communities is they become fabrics that are walkable and livable at a much higher level than they are right now, where you just have the hostility of 90,000 vehicles a day through the intersection of Sunrise and Greenback. Did I say Greenback? Yeah, that's right. Okay, I always get Greenhaven and Greenback mixed up. So.
Okay.
So the answer is yes, Lori. And we, our practice is working on many of those kinds of projects.
That's really exciting because I have all those amenities living in Midtown, and I don't have to drive, and I can take a gig car or jump bike or, all kinds of possibilities. But people that are commuting from the suburbs don't seem to have that. So can we do that really fast?
If I were king.
Thanks. Alberto?
Thank you, and thank you, David, for your very eloquent argument. I had the pleasure of participating in the TAC, so I attended and engaged in a couple of the meetings, and had the opportunity to hear your very strong arguments, which I fully agree with. But in all fairness, for the commissioners who were not at the TAC, who did not have the opportunity to engage with the very efficient and effective process that you guys put together, can you perhaps just give a sense to the commissioners in terms of perhaps some of the divergent views that we heard as part of the TAC process? Because clearly you've made your position very clear in a very eloquent way, but as you pointed, this is going to be a difficult, controversial issue. And
Yes.
I think, in all fairness for the commissioners, particularly as we prepare to engage in our own discussion, maybe you can give a flavor of some of
That's a big ask,
some of the other
Alberto.
things that we heard.
Okay, I'll do my best to remember what some of those things are. And, some people are going to say that it has to do with affordability, all right, number one. And the affordability equation, unfortunately, when we talk about affordability, we focus just on housing. And we need to think about affordable communities and all of the urban overhead that is involved in what it takes people to live in the community. And so if you can get a family that is living with one automobile instead of two, for example, that $10,000 a year is a net present value towards real estate of what, $175,000 and more house that they can afford? That's a big deal. And so that you need to think about affordability more broadly. That's an important piece of the equation. What else? That the builders don't want to do it. That's probably the biggest resistance. That's changing. In Portland, for example, they started this process 30 years ago. Maybe it was 35 years ago now. And they committed to an urban growth boundary, clear and specific, in the state legislature. And they started doing all that they could to promote infill development at transit and within the existing parts of the city. And they've succeeded immensely. Probably 60 to 70% of the housing in Portland now is all infill housing that's reinforcing existing neighborhoods that were missing big investment in a lot of ways, and making their transit system more economically viable as well. Help me out. What are some of the other objections to this? Politically difficult, without a doubt. And it's probably not something that's going to be an easy consensus. At the legislative level, Sacramento, and I don't think West Sacramento participates in the group, but there's the Big Cities group that Sacramento, and our mayor is now chair of that group at the moment. What a great venue for advocacy at the state legislature with a past pro tem. And so we have an opportunity at the legislature, because there are going to be political barriers, probably from the existing League of Cities, from the county CSAC, and probably, I wouldn't be surprised, from the COGS as well. And of course, the BIA is going to resist it too. But the good news is I happen to sit on a board of directors of a council of infill builders. We've been successful at the legislature in the last few years, being a counterpoint to the statewide BIA and forces that are there. So anyway, that's all I've got right now, Alberta.
Excellent.
Thanks. It's never easy to raise the arguments against your own position.
Yeah,
Well
that's
done.
okay. That's all right.
You did a good job. Anyone else? Yes, James.
So
David, maybe I'll help you out with some concerns.
Very good. Thank you, James.
As I don't think it will surprise you. So, at SACOG, we represent 22 cities and 6 counties, and I did a lot of work in the Bay Area in my former life, where a lot of communities had urban growth boundaries. But I am curious. It seems like you're focusing on a tactic rather than the line, rather than what happens inside the line. You gave a great, compelling presentation, right, about the outcomes, the types of communities that all the polls suggest everybody wants. To me, I'm not sure if inside this recommendation is the urban design, the lowering the parking, the providing there's a lot within the built environment. It's the mixed use, the form-based codes, the zoning, the affordability. Where is all of the stuff that actually has to happen to build great urban and revitalized suburban communities?
And all that stuff is inherent to the recommendation. That is an essential ingredient that we have to facilitate the best quality infill development that we can. But you are not going to succeed without having a limitation at the perimeter. And that doesn't have to be a hard line. You're absolutely correct if that's where you're going. There's a lot of vehicles that can be used to do that. It can be a VMT fee. Just as an example, James, that Central City VMT is what, 7 miles per dwelling unit, per household, and out in Anatolia, it's 32, 35 VMT per day. And so you could say, well, we have the CEQA mechanism in 743 that Darrell carried. And we could expand that in some form or manner so that we have a very severe penalty on VMT generation. Or it can be a charge on infrastructure costs. I can't remember the name of the study. I know you know a lot more about this than I do, but there was a study done in Washington State about 7 or 8 years ago that evaluated the real infrastructure costs of sprawl. And it was in the range of public costs, and I don't think it included operational costs, just capital costs, in the range of $120,000 to $130,000 per dwelling unit. That's all stuff that the community is spreading out and everybody else is carrying, except for the developer that's making the profit out there or the homeowner that's getting a break on the cost. And there are mechanisms like that can limit the sprawl as well.
All right, thanks. And I will say we have lots of time allotted later in the agenda for this discussion. Thank you, David. Okay, moving on to the second strategy, electrification of new buildings.
Okay, so I'd like to first introduce my colleague here, Kelly Cunningham, who was a TAC member and works for PG&E on statewide codes and standards. First off, the second tactic we are focused on here is electrification of new construction. And the TAC really felt that this is an area, as Scott alluded to earlier, that is cost effective today. We could be making this switch and helping save our residents money right off the bat, both on the cost of their homes as well as the cost of operating those homes, and saving significant amounts of carbon. As I mentioned earlier, the availability of renewable gas to address our natural gas emissions is really a challenge in the state. It's really a drop in the bucket at a multiple of the cost. So since we have so little of it, it really does not make sense for us to continue to be expanding our gas infrastructure network outward every year, as we're doing right now with our multi-fuel homes. We have to, at some point, put a stop to that expansion of that gas infrastructure network, because we're going to have to be figuring out ways to retrofit and roll all of that back in to meet the carbon zero targets. So I mentioned, Scott really, I think, mentioned quite a bit around the cost effectiveness of this and the future proofing of this relative to the 2045 target, as well as the indoor air quality and public safety opportunities that we have. The cost savings that were mentioned, really the range that we've seen from a variety of studies is between $3,000 and $10,000 off of the upfront cost of a new home, which in California, with the housing affordability crisis that we have, is really significant in making new homes more accessible to a broader set of residents. In addition to that cost advantage that builders enjoy today with all-electric new construction, we have the opportunity that SMUD is offering incentives of up to $5,000 per new construction single-family unit and up to $1,750 per multifamily unit, further creating that incentive for builders to try and help move that market forward. So in terms of what the TAC is recommending, the recommendation was to mandate all-electric construction to eliminate fossil fuel use in new buildings by 2023. And the TAC is focused on 2023 because the building code cycle is a 3-year cycle, and the feeling was the ship is already moving too far down the road to be able to address this by the 2020 cycle. So really the 2023 code cycle is when we feel this could be addressed. As well, there was discussion about whether this should apply to both residential and large commercial. And certainly there's recognition that within the large commercial space, central heat pump water heating is a technology challenge that we are actively working on from a research, development, emerging design opportunity. And that's an area that I think as we look to implement this strategy and the specific ordinances with it, more work is needed to figure out whether or not that piece of it can be cost effective. Other than that, all of the rest of the recommendation was felt to be very cost effective. So I'm going to ask Kelly to come up and talk a little bit more about her experience working with the statewide efforts on this.
So one of the tools that you might opt to use should you decide to move forward with the strategy is REACH code. And within PG&E, that's one of my roles, is to work in a statewide community, a utility coalition that addresses REACH code needs for cities who ask for them. So we are currently working on a project to support approximately 40 cities statewide that are all interested in investigating a REACH code to support some measure of electrification in their areas, in addition to efficiency, which is traditionally what's in a REACH code regarding energy. So there are resources available through this statewide utility team to support cities who need them or want to explore this. And there are also other groups now active in this area, including the Zero Emissions Building Working Group, which is associated with the Building Decarb Coalition. So what we are doing is diving deep into understanding the cost effectiveness of these types of REACH codes. We are also looking at technical feasibility, and you've heard that a few times today. What technologies are ready? What are their incremental costs? What will be the on-bill savings? What will be the code compliance benefits or risks with any particular package that might be in a REACH code? And also the enforceability, because the building department ultimately has to enforce a REACH code that you might pass. So there are resources available to take some of the work burden off of Sacramento and West Sacramento, should you decide to move forward with an ordinance of some type. That January 1st, 2020 is the start of the next code cycle for Title 24, Part 6. The next one after that is January 1st, 2023. It could be incremental. You could do something now and then all later. And that's what we're exploring for this statewide 40 or more city group that's asked the utilities and the Zero Emissions Building Coalition to kind of, hey, can you do this work for us and let us know what's possible?
A couple of last points on the strategy, wanting to point back to the community input, which indicated an interest in electrification as well as in accelerating climate action as a priority. And as well, I skipped over some of the financing opportunities with the iBank Infrastructure State Revolving Fund, as well as the Opportunity Zones tax incentives as a way to spur long-term investments in low-income communities. So I think those are both really important opportunities for us to think about as we think about equity issues in the new construction space. And really, I just want to leave with a reiteration of the importance of not digging this hole that we're digging or that we're in any deeper in terms of gas infrastructure. We have a cost-effective solution to reach to today, and really this is an incremental step for us, but it's got tremendous benefit down the road by taking this step.
And you might ask, is PG&E supportive of this? And I conferred with colleagues, as I must, to attend something like this. And yes, PG&E is interested in listening to communities that are interested in not extending gas infrastructure into greenfield areas that maybe won't be supported in the long term with the throughput, the amount of gas needed. It could be small, could be reducing. So don't build the infrastructure, take that monetary savings if that's what the community wants. So.
Okay, very good, thank you. Did you have something else to say?
Nope.
Okay, great.
Q&A.
Or not great, but, okay, questions on the new buildings? Robert Nelson, and then who's, Julia? Yeah.
I really appreciate the information that you gave us earlier on cost savings and that. I wish we would have had it before the meeting today because we had gone through, a lot of back and forth all day about it. So I appreciate that information. But I'm worried about equity, and I'm wondering why the word mandate instead of incentivize. PG&E and especially SMUD have been very effective in using incentives to be able to move us forward and been proactive. And if you have an incentive to do it, you're not necessarily mandating someone who can't do it. You could stop local building just because I can't afford to do that, so I'm going to just stay where I am. If there's an incentive, you can then say, okay, we're going to start moving in that way. So if you could just talk about why mandate, why that strategy versus incentivizing.
Sure. Yeah, first off, I would say we have today an incentive mechanism available, and we are capturing some of the market. I think we're up to, should be up to about 2,000 new homes in the pipeline that are participating in our all-electric new homes program. So that is working incrementally, but as we talk about carbon zero, it's really important to understand that that future does not involve burning natural gas in our buildings. That's going to be something that we're going to have to phase out, and residential new construction represents the easiest target to go after in starting to make that journey. Furthermore, from a cost perspective, it's from an equity perspective, it's really unfair to add that cost to the cost of new homes. It's making it unaffordable to build homes with gas. We get up to a $10,000 per home cost savings right off the bat, avoiding the gas infrastructure that's going in the street, into the home, being piped throughout the home. All those costs are saved by going to electric. And then on top of it, the incentives that I mentioned really bring that cost down quite a bit.
But you're assuming that the person has enough money to be able to start the new construction anyway now. And that's a basic assumption in the mandating. Okay, and there are a lot of people that just don't have that ability to be able to do that.
This is for the construction of new buildings.
Yeah, but you're assuming.
So if someone is going to build a new building, we're making a strategy recommendation to build it more cheaply, save the carbon, save the customers money on their bills, save on the cost of the upfront cost of the housing.
I'm just worrying that you're going to create barrios.
Wait, what?
Ghettos. You're going to keep people in places where you're not actually, the new construction will not take place there.
Well, I think from what we've observed, it should be reducing the cost of new construction, but.
Arlen wants to comment. Yeah.
No, I was just going to ask a question, and it's along the lines of, could you talk a little bit, because I think obviously the word mandate is a hot button. It's a hot button for us when we're at the legislature, so I understand that. But the state's imposition of mandates on building standards is longstanding. It's nothing new. Could you talk a little bit? I mean, the state imposes fire codes and safety codes, and for many, many years, the state has adopted progressively more stringent Title 24 requirements to reduce both the energy efficiency or to increase the energy efficiency of homes, but also the carbon. So at least in California, mandates around construction is not unusual, and it's kind of the standard way of advancing the way you construct buildings. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I think you did a decent job of covering that.
I think there was a question in
the
there
leading
somewhere.
question, but
There was an answer in there.
essentially, yes. Every 3 years, the Energy Commission updates its Title 24 codes, and as part of that, sets new requirements for energy efficiency that is cost-effective. And so in some of those instances, they are adding to the upfront cost of construction, but the customers ultimately receive that money back in reduced energy bills. And recently, they adopted a requirement of putting solar on all new homes as an example of one where they had evaluated that it would raise the upfront cost, but that money would be seen back in reduced customer bills over the life of the home or over a measure life. In this case, this is actually one where it reduces the upfront cost and it reduces the bill. So it should sort of jump to the front of that line as we look at the types of things that have been set in building standards. There are some changes afoot at the Energy Commission in the way that they've historically done this evaluation that is leading to a path that looks very similar to this, but I'm anxious from a sort of local versus for the state to act perspective that there's going to be absolutely heavy lobbying in both venues, and it's no guarantee that the state is going to move to a mandate for all electric in 2023. So I think this is an opportunity for Sacramento to take a step forward on something that will save our customers money and reduce the cost of constructing new homes.
Julia.
I had a quick question for you, Kelly, which is, it sounds like Sacramento and West Sacramento have not opted into the 40-city program, and we need to indicate that we would like to be interested in that or included in your work.
Yeah, and there's nothing to opt in on that's a
Okay.
formal process per se. It's just starting the communication line with some of the groups that are active in this area. One of them, statewide utility team, and that's the 4 IOUs and Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and we're always happy to work with SMUD as well. And then that's also the Building Decarb Coalition's working group. So it's just a matter of saying, let's explore this. Can I see the reports that you've already done? Let me see the 2019 cost effectiveness studies that are in progress. For example, there's some drafts posted on localenergycodes.com so that you can start to see the data for this climate zone of what have you factored in and what could an ordinance for this region look like that's specific and geographically customized.
And then I just wanted to add a comment to the discussion that we were just having back in my previous life in the city of Roseville. When you're talking about mandate versus incentivize, part of that is the predictability that the developer needs coming into the front counter. And so if you incentivize and you have one homeowner who opts in and wants the gas connection, then you're paying that gas infrastructure and connection for the subdivision. If you say mandate, you're taking away the uncertainty of having to plumb for that whole subdivision. So that's one of the lenses that I was looking at it, is that you're being very predictable when you use the word mandate. And in this case, with benefits of lower cost. Usually we were arguing over developer fees with people like Mr. Mogavero. They were predictable in Roseville. They were high, but you got the infrastructure early.
Arlen or Meg, someone want to speak over there?
No.
No, okay.
Thank you, not me.
No, sorry, because the light was on. I wasn't like trying to call you out. Okay. Obadiah, I just have a clarifying question. You mentioned the large commercial in the presentation, but are you recommending that the strategy go forward as it's written, which would apply to all new construction?
That is the recommendation. I think as we work towards implementing it, I think there may need to be some carve-out created if we're not able to demonstrate the cost-effective solutions to the central heat pump water heating solution. But the recommendation is to move forward without an explicit caveat recognizing we need to demonstrate cost effectiveness for all of these building types as part of that type of a mandate.
Okay, great, thank you. Alberto, then James?
All right, Obadiah. Two quick questions. One is, maybe just to go back to the earlier discussion so I understand it, the conversation on equity and cost. You're saying that basically for new construction, you could do all electric at no greater expense than actually plumbing the gas line. In fact, it should be lower.
Right.
That's what,
right.
Okay.
Yep.
And then is the vehicle for this, the code update, is that what, this is not state legislation that's required, this is the state code?
So yeah, this eventually can be done through Title 24. The vehicle that Kelly mentioned of adopting a REACH code would allow a local jurisdiction to move ahead of the state code.
Got it. The two cities could do that.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
Just to clarify on that point, the 2023 date refers back to what? The date the mandate gets adopted? Or
2023 would be when a builder would need to start building all electric. So when adoption of this type of a REACH
effective
code,
date of the mandate.
Yeah, as it's being recommended.
Alberto, and then Mike.
Thank you. I'll make it quick, but I felt important to echo what Julia said, because I'm also going to draw on my previous experience. I spent almost 2 decades prior to my current job as a policymaker at the state level. So this issue of balancing mandates and incentives is critical to state policy, and I think it's very important, because when mandates are put in place, you provide clarity to the marketplace. Incentives are very effective, and they should be working in concert, with the so-called carrot and the stick. But to the point about why a mandate, you have very successful incentives. Other utilities have very successful incentives, and we haven't made the progress that this commission is interested in. So I do want to see a balanced approach where you provide the market clarity that mandates bring to the table, but continued incentives. And do the incentives in a way that it's equitable, so that those that can least afford it maybe get more. We've tried that in other sectors, so I think the solution is a balanced approach.
Okay, Mike, and then we'll move on to the third strategy.
There we go. Quick question. I can't remember, was the restaurant industry involved in the TAC?
No, I don't believe we had any representatives from the restaurant industry.
Okay, thank you.
I know induction cooking versus gas cooking is kind of a debate topic that has come up quite a bit, and the restaurant industry is certainly used to cooking with gas, although we're seeing really some of the leading chefs in the country coming out expressing their support for moving to induction. So I think that's not going to be a unified opposition to this as people gain experience with induction and find that it actually performs as well without the emissions.
But you're not sure?
Not sure.
Because you haven't got input from the...
So yes, they were not on the TAC. So
Certain to invite them when we have the business roundtable and get their input then. So thanks for raising that. Okay, this is really the last question. And then we'll move on. Go ahead.
What about manufacturing? Was manufacturing also? Because I didn't understand until you just said a few minutes ago, it's all new construction. So what about manufacturing?
We did not have a lot of dialogue around manufacturing on the TAC, so I don't know that I could represent it being inclusive. I do think to the extent we're going to be doing new manufacturing, we should be wary of trying to invest a lot in manufacturing processes that are dependent on fossil fuels. But to the extent we do, that may be an opportunity for renewable gas to play a role in the future to the extent there's adequate supply.
If I could just add to that, I think thinking about the business and finance roundtable conversations, if we wanted to make sure that there was a manufacturing presence in that, the Sacramento Valley Manufacturing Initiative, or SVMI, that Valley Vision helps to coordinate, would be a great channel to get into that community.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks, everyone. Let's move.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for the clarification on that, because there was a question that was brewing in my head around whether new commercial manufacturing would fit into this. I got to think about our business community in West Sacramento, where we have a large jobs to residents ratio. So it is something that I'll need clarity on in terms of how that was thought about from your TAC, because I'm not sure you're prepared. What I'm hearing is you're not prepared to stand up and say, do we consider that completely? It's something we need to think about, but I'm taking this as really looking at new residential construction. Would that be a safe assumption on my end?
That's the predominant share, although new commercial, like office buildings or sort of buildings that essentially are using natural gas for heating, water, and space heating, those should be subject to this.
All right, I just wanted to understand it. Thank you.
These are all good points. As I read it, it's all new construction. That's what the words say. This is a draft. We're going to get more input as we go through the business roundtable. We need those business voices at the table as part of this. So thanks for the comment. Okay, now, Trish.
Hi there. I heard it mentioned a little bit earlier about labor unions and trades union. Did you involve them in the discussion at the TAC on, because regardless on either side, there's trades that would be affected by this?
So not specifically in the TAC process. However, there has been some engagement from labor in the statewide dialogue around this, and as you noted, there's some split. IBEW is pretty supportive. The gas pipeline workers for at least SoCal Gas came out in opposition to moving down this path. So I will acknowledge that it's not, it was not part of the TAC dialogue, but it is part of the statewide discussion.
But Obadiah, did you tell me that SMUD had not long ago done a study on the job impacts?
There are actually, I believe Sierra Club has commissioned a study that is not yet out, so I don't have the figures from that to be able to share.
All right.
Could I just add one comment on that, just to on? As SMUD was moving forward with its all-electric, to support all-electric homes, we did have conversations with the local building and trades, and we did not hear any objection from them on this topic. Doesn't mean they would feel the same way about a mandate, but our program and our support for all-electric, we did not hear any opposition from them during our public process.
Okay.
All right,
on to strategy 3.
Okay.
The hard one. And it's the hard one. Right?
The third strategy, yeah, that was the easier one. So the third strategy that the TAC felt was really critical is kind of the elephant in the room, which was the existing buildings, which when you add all that new construction we just talked about out over the next 25 years, existing buildings are still going to represent 80% of the built environment that's operating 25 years out from now when we're trying to be at zero carbon. So we really cannot get there without some focus on addressing existing buildings. As Scott illustrated pretty well, the strategy around electrifying these buildings results in really substantial greenhouse gas emissions, and really we feel is the only path to get us to the 2045 objective. That said, we know it's going to be challenging, and so I'll talk through some of those challenges. So I think one of those areas that's brought up is the cost effectiveness, and some of Scott's slides alluded to this, but really what we see as an opportunity is in the heat pump space heating area, there is actually a cost savings opportunity versus a gas furnace, because you have essentially one system. It's got a reversing valve in it. So the heat pump system itself is essentially leveraging much, if not all, of the same infrastructure that you are going to put in for a residential air conditioner. So you get capital cost savings estimated at about $3,000 upfront, in addition to a $400 to $600 bill saving for customers that make that switch. For heat pump water heaters, that's a bit of a newer technology, and we are seeing those come in with a cost premium to start with, although we've seen pretty substantial cost reduction on the install cost side, and the capital cost of the equipment is actually very close to the capital cost of its gas alternative and below the cost of a tankless gas water heater. So that there's some cost premium there. SMUD has some pretty large incentives to try to address that cost premium. We're currently offering up to $10,000 for existing homes to help bring that cost down and actually create a positive cost right off the bat to customers who are choosing to do this. We've seen the contractor community respond very positively to this. We're seeing ads right now from plumbers offering $99 to replace your gas water heater with a heat pump water heater. So that's incredible to be able to get a new piece of equipment for such a low cost. We also are working on financing options, including one that is attempting to get at the segment that Flo brought up earlier, specifically the renter segment and low income. So we're looking at a pay-as-you-save mechanism, which would essentially be like an on-bill financing type of an approach that would allow people to pay the cost of these appliances off over the life of the appliance, over 10 or 15 years on their electric bill, so creating savings on their gas bill and paying that off on their electric bill. In addition, there are the Property Assessed Clean Energy or PACE financing and a statewide energy efficiency program financing that are available. Another aspect of equity, just while I'm touching on it, is the indoor air quality that was mentioned. This is something that we feel very strongly is going to be really a significant benefit for those frontline communities that are dealing with already exacerbated air quality issues, and the opportunity to have cleaner air in our homes and reduce asthma cases. One study that we found identified about 15% of statewide asthma cases linked to indoor combustion using gas stoves. So it's really a significant opportunity to improve the health outcomes for those customers or for those citizens. So the TAC recommendation is to transition 25% of existing residential homes and small commercial buildings to all electric by 2030. This is in addition to our existing building stock that's all electric, which is about 20% of our current City of Sacramento buildings. And we also ran into the same sort of discussions around central heat pump water heating and the challenges of fitting that into existing large commercial or large multifamily buildings. So that continues to be a technology challenge here that we'll have to deal with. As well, we had a discussion about, what kind of milestone year should we be setting here for this target, and we were looking at 2030, both as sort of a midway point towards this carbon zero target to know what we're sort of aiming for that would be on track, but also recognizing that appliances have about a 15-year life. And so we really need to be focusing on transforming this entire market by 2030. So really thinking hard about what could we possibly do by then so that we're essentially not selling gas appliances in Sacramento after that. We're not installing those. So recognizing this is going to be a significant lift. We're at maybe 1 or 2% market share right now, and trying to get to 100% in this time frame is going to be a big lift. We are moving ahead with the really significant incentives and are going to depend on a really broad education campaign to try to get the word out and help people understand the benefits of moving in this direction. And at the same time, we recognize as we do this, if we aren't getting the traction that we need to get to these levels, we may have to look at mandates for replacement with electric options, likely coupled with incentives to start to make sure that it's both a mandate, but there's a carrot that comes with it. And in so doing, we absolutely have to make sure that this does not burden our low-income residents or small businesses. So making sure that perhaps to Alberto's suggestion that there are more incentives available for those that most need it as we look to transition into this all-electric future. So I'm going to ask Kelly to also share some of what PG&E is doing in this space.
So my contribution to this portion will be a little narrow in scope. I'm just going to talk about some programs we're working on that specifically address frontline communities and also zonal electrification. So we are currently looking to assist customers dependent on propane and wood for cooking and heating to transition to all electric in the San Joaquin Valley. And we have our proposed AB 2868 behind the meter thermal storage program. So that piece of legislation was about storage, which will help propane customers adopt high-efficiency electric heat pumps, water heaters, and align with customer water heater usage with the time of use plan. So using the water heater to superheat and store and make sure that they're not using that electric device at a time where they're going to pay a peak price, and then it may be perceived as a penalty. So help them manage the asset that they have. Because it's new technology-ish, not food coolers. This program will serve low-income customers and customers with homes and small businesses in those frontline communities. We are also considering a zonal electrification pilot, which may speak a little bit to what Mr. Nelson was getting to. If you pick and choose one home here, one home there, what are you doing to the neighborhood? So a zonal electrification pilot for certain eligible customers is what we're considering right now in fire-impacted areas who are rebuilding these structures that were destroyed by disaster. So that's what we're exploring right now. And we do expect that there will be emerging energy efficiency programs to support all electric incentives, but we're in a state of flux right now in terms of how programs are being administered at the IOUs. So we're eager for the market to bring us some really innovative solutions in the next year. And I would hope that you would invite PG&E to the table to talk about any type of zonal pilot that you might be considering that would come out of this commission. And so that's what we're working on right now.
Thanks, Kelly. So just to wrap this one up, I wanted to reflect back on some of the community input that was received earlier, presented earlier, which indicated importance in investing in existing communities, in retrofitting existing buildings, and in energy efficiency, and also the demonstration of the willingness of our community to embrace switching from natural gas to electric technologies. I think it's really important to understand if we're serious about getting to the mayor's zero carbon goals, we have to do something about our existing building natural gas use. This strategy is the one that TAC felt most adequately got at that direction, and we're hopeful that you all will see that as well and embrace it for the contribution it would make.
Great, thank you. Arlen.
Thanks. I just have a quick question, Obadiah. As we're looking at the existing buildings, do I understand the recommendation, just so I'm clear on it, that initially the focus on existing buildings is incentive-based decision-making for customers? So it's not necessarily a mandate in the next several years. It's more focused on let's do incentives and education to get people comfortable as they're making replacement decisions.
That's right.
And then there would be some check-in at some point prior to 2030 that if we're not on track to make changes, then you would consider whether a mandate was necessary at that time. But at least the initial recommendation is a focus on incentives.
Yes.
Okay, good clarification. Thank you. Flo.
Okay, so I want to bring my question back around, which is around this question of what do we do for the folks who are renting? And I know you mentioned the pay-as-you-save programs, but that still feels like something that would be under the purview of the homeowner because the appliances are often owned by your landlord or rental company. And so I'm trying to figure out what our options are, given that this portion of it, which is 80% of the built environment, is going to focus on incentives and not mandates. What are we doing to be able to protect our low-income residents who are long-term renters. I'm especially concerned about this because of the stat that you talked about with 15% of asthma cases being linked directly to indoor environment. I'd love to know what that number is for low-income residents because I have a feeling it's much higher. So I'm just trying to think about we have public safety and public health. And so, and then we don't have an opportunity for the people who are going to bear the burden of this, to have an opportunity at all to be able to have any say in what's in their home.
Sure. So the pay-as-you-save mechanism that I mentioned, the reason we're interested in it is it would tag the financing to the person paying the electric bill in a home. So it wouldn't put any burden on the owner of the home to have to come up with that capital. Even if their air conditioner went out, usually a homeowner is going to have to, or their heater went out, they're going to have to pay for replacing that. In this case, this would be a mechanism where a resident could tell their homeowner, hey, I want to participate in SMUD's program, switch this out to an electric option. It's not going to be capital out of your pocket. It's going to be capital that's paid back on the bill over the life of the measure. So if that person moves out, the next person that comes in would have the benefits of the bill savings from the natural gas side, would be paying off the equipment on the electric side.
Okay, I mean, I think there's still some potential challenges there in terms of ultimate decision-making, being with the property owner. And so if they say, no, I don't want that, you are left with no recourse. And so I certainly appreciate the role of mandate versus, sort of the incentive. But I think in this case, especially when it comes to rental properties, that the mandate needs to be there. Otherwise, we're not going to have those options for our renters. And so what we're going to see is all the people who own their homes are going to be electrifying by 2030, and all the people buying, building new homes are going to electrify by 2030. And we're going to see this, because I just don't think the pay-as-you-save program is going to be enough to, it requires a lot of, the impetus falls on the consumer to be able to put this in, but also they don't have the power to make the ultimate decision. So I'm struggling a little bit with the recommendation, given that it doesn't have more teeth for our most vulnerable populations.
I appreciate the thoughts, and I absolutely agree that that's a significantly challenging segment, and this isn't like energy efficiency where people can go buy efficient light bulbs and be better off for that. These are bigger investments, and so do implicate the homeowner. And I think mandates are always a hard thing to reach directly for without thinking through all the unintended consequences. But I agree with you in that case. It probably would be helpful for those owners to have that incentive mechanism, or the
I'd actually be in favor of pursuing the mandate option for the rental properties in particular before we did it even for the other properties, because I think that's a much better way to offer those protections for like I said, our low-income residents who don't have control over it, in a way that the homeowners, we could possibly consider making them the incentive-based ones, because they ultimately are going to, but I would be much more comfortable with that being in place for the folks who have less say.
Another question.
Yeah, Arlen, then Alberto.
Just on that point, my recollection is that and this is a challenge. You're absolutely right. It's a challenge, and for our low-income customers who are homeowners, it's easy to go in, and in fact, we have retrofit programs where we pay for everything. Where we find where we have the best ability to impact is in multifamily, and so we found multifamily property owners to be very cooperative in this area. I think that's much easier, especially if you have a partner like SHRA who is a great partner in this and has helped point us in that direction. It is single family. You're right. Single family or duplexes or things are much, because you're going house by house by house. One of the areas, just as PG&E talked about the zonal approach, we've talked internally about the same approach and looking at how do you go in and do a whole neighborhood, because it'll be a lot more cost effective. So that may be one approach to being able to address this. And obviously, it requires big investment by the utilities, but it would also require probably some support and additional investment from whatever the local government is.
Alberto.
I'm going to ask a different question, but I think it's a question that is necessary for the commissioners to understand. And that is in terms of, perhaps for you, Ann and Kate, what happens next after we take action on what the TAC brought us? Because what I'm hearing, to Flo's points, Obadiah has been too modest, but we actually had a very robust discussion on one of the TACs that got into a little bit of this. I think there were some really good points, concerns raised about, did we include all of the right stakeholders in the process? So I think one thing that is important for all of us to understand is, what does it mean when we take action on what you're proposing today, which my understanding was to provide global direction, a high-level strategy, prioritizing the areas that we want to work on as a commission, and then what happens after to fill in the blanks, to develop the detail in terms of how do we ensure that we provide benefit to all, how do we make sure that we have everybody at the table, how is the process going to work? So perhaps you guys can help the commission understand that.
Yeah, I'll start by what we're acting on today, and then Kate, you can follow up about what happens next. So these are draft strategies. They are indeed very broad, and I'm just looking at this one. It doesn't really say mandate or not. And so it's been left to the implementers at this point to decide. So we're voting on the draft strategies that will come back definitely to this commission for another vote as the final report gets drafted, which is 6-7 months down the road. So there's time for evolution between now and then, and I'll let Kate talk about the various forums and input that we'll get between now and when those recommendations come back in their final form.
Right, so we will be maintaining this high level of detail, so we are not voting on the implementation measures, but we're voting to put these overarching big picture strategies forward. Ultimately, what we'll be doing is we'll have the mobility TAC, the health and resiliency TAC, we'll have the business roundtable, which will have the advantage business and financing roundtable of looking at all of the TAC recommendations and weighing in on those. Throughout that process, we will have the public engagement process that we heard from Ramey and others about, that will align with our progression through of the strategies. Ultimately, we will have one more chance as a group to take any TAC recommendations we advance forward to the mayors to recommend that they adopt them and pursue those strategies. So that gives us another time to have this conversation about these particular strategies, and we'll want to be looking at them from a portfolio perspective. So that's where we'll look and see, okay, we've got the 3 major built environment recommendations. We'll have the about 3 on mobility, 3 on health and resiliency, and then we'll need to look to see if there's anything missing, if we're properly addressing our underserved neighborhoods, if we're making sure we have a balance of environmental leadership and ambition, but also not impacting negatively our business and economic development goals as well. So that is the process. At the point when we hand it over to the city, that's where there will be more robust implementation measures that they will have to pursue. So both cities are doing climate action plans. So that is a chance where you can get into the more technical pieces. There are consultants working with the cities on their plans, and some of this is more appropriate to be dealt with at that level. Similar, we spoke with the commission about the fact that we're not going to be able to do a robust economic analysis on each of these, but there may be strategies that when we get to the final recommendation, we say, as the cities look at implementing these overarching strategies, they should be doing an analysis on the economic impact. So that will be a conversation we'll have towards the end of the process when we have all the strategies and can have that portfolio view.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that clarification and for Alberto for prompting that question, because that was on my mind as well. I want to go back to a couple things that you've been talking about. One, when you mentioned indoor air quality, we know in particular, it's like as we go back just last year, the wildfires, and how much indoor particulate that people had to deal with, which brings me to the question of, as we're looking to reduce the carbon footprint and GHG emissions coming from homes, what have you kind of looked in terms of weatherization and how much that reduces the GHG uses in your homes? Because if we're looking at that, and a potential cost and really going through that versus having someone go into their walls and pull out, and install more electrical equipment, what's been the mix or reduction on that?
So, so in terms of what we can achieve with weatherization and insulation, typical jobs that we see are gaining about 10 to 15% efficiency improvement. You can possibly do more than that if you have a very leaky home, but that's a typical figure. So that's certainly an option. From a cost effectiveness standpoint, typically we're not seeing those jobs being done by themselves. They're usually being bundled in with HVAC replacement. We do have a direct install program targeted toward our lower income customers that is installing those measures for free. And we're looking at sort of what it will take to scale that up and build in these building electrification measures into that program. But anyway, so hopefully I got at your question.
Yeah, no, you did start to get at that. Second question, when we look at the some of the figures that we initially have, and if you don't have this now, this is definitely something to then bring back as we get into more details. How much of the actual cost of construction is covered in this versus just the replacement of the equipment?
So when you're talking about the incentive, are you talking about the incentives? Yeah. So I think the figures for like the all-in cost of replacing your HVAC, if you were to like completely electrify your home, you would be looking at between 15 and 20K to do that. So this is covering probably 60 to 70% of that. If you look at individual jobs, I mentioned that the heat pump water heaters that are being offered for $99 installed. So in that case, we're offering a bit more to get that market moving. There's a little less familiarity or less plumbers that are installing that product. So this is really trying to accelerate that market. So it's hard to put like a standard cost to this because each house is a bit different in terms of their HVAC layouts and what makes the best financial sense for them. But I would say that's a pretty good estimate, about 60 to 70% for the heating and cooling side.
And then third question, this goes back to one we were discussing a little earlier on for the renters and the pay-go in terms of getting new equipment in. And I think you kind of answered this, but if so, I didn't quite hear it. What happens when they leave?
So that program design is one where the loan is tied to the premise in the form of like a line item on the electric bill. So
tied to the person who's getting a utility bill or to the building owner?
It's the person who's getting the utility bill.
Okay.
So if that customer leaves and a new customer comes in and gets the utility bill, they're on the hook for paying that equipment off. The savings, though, are coming in on the gas side. So it should be offsetting that.
Thank you.
Lori, then Chris.
I wanted to ask a little bit about the education component, because I don't think people think about this if they're going to have to retrofit down the road, but they need to buy something right now. I just bought a refrigerator because mine went out, and the salespeople knew little about energy efficiency. They weren't very supportive of getting Energy Star refrigerator, there wasn't any incentive. There was the rebate that SMUD gives, and I think SMUD is doing a great job in all those things. But how do you let people know that this is coming down the road and make it really easy for them to choose a heat pump rather than a new HVAC system? Because it seems like something that needs to be done immediately if they're going to have to change in the next few years.
Yeah, there's two components to that. The first one is the contractors who, if a customer calls a plumber or a customer calls an HVAC contractor and says, hey, I'm interested in a new water heater or a new heater, what can you quote me? If the contractors are aware of this program and participating, we're seeing them become kind of a leading sales channel for this and promoter of this technology. So that's really important if they're the ones sitting across the table from you, providing you a quote, that they're behind this. The second is kind of mass market education, which we have not started. We're working on our marketing campaign on this, and as well there's a statewide California Building Decarbonization Group that Kelly mentioned that is working on a statewide campaign around this. We've had that type of thing for energy efficiency upgrades and for electric vehicles, but really nothing has been done to date in terms of a mass market on building electrification. So I would say that's coming within the next year. Yeah.
Would that, thank you, would that be on both, that's a statewide effort that you're both, am I hearing that right?
Yep. There will be a SMUD campaign that folks in Sacramento will be seeing, and there's going to be also a statewide effort.
Yeah, and I think that's where my questions, maybe our friends from PG&E can answer in terms of how, and I think you're making the point for me in terms of, I'm hearing very clearly SMUD's incentives, and Kelly, I appreciate you taking part in the TAC and coming to it, but I think the unfinished part for me is around directly what incentives, what programs, West Sacramento, Yolo County residents have with PG&E service, and are they comparable to what SMUD has? Because honestly, it's a bit of an unknown for me in terms of our ability to achieve this. And I appreciate everyone else's comments and questions about implementation, and SMUD obviously has stepped forward with a lot of great programs, but I think this is the unfinished part. I'm not going to put you on the spot today around kind of what you can do. Maybe you can, but I think this is the work that'll last, to step back with the TAC and our staff to kind of really put numbers on paper in terms of what it will mean for us, because we got to be on par or better than what Sacramento residents are getting to kind of hit that same target that is being sought after. We want people, and it's just a crazy notion for me that my parents who live on the other side of the river have more incentive to do things in their older home than I do. And so it's just one of those things that I'm going to have to get really comfortable with and understanding as we move forward on this. And I appreciate your comment on what we are voting on today, or what we are agreeing to taking action on today, and that it's really unfinished, because this is an area that we just haven't delved into on our energy use in Yolo County and West Sacramento. It already, as our business friends Mike down the way knows, it already poses us competitive issues because of difference in actual rates of electricity. But it also, this is another area that will be equally important to our residents. So maybe you want to answer some of that, but I'm going to be okay for today in terms of how PG&E is going to step forward and partner in this effort to get us to some of the incentives that we will need to see to achieve these things.
Well, I won't be able to say anything conclusive because there's a lot moving right now, but there are some emerging efforts that West Sacramento may want to raise their hand if they are interested in speaking with PG&E about being a pilot area an early adopter. But then there's also some policy changes that are coming soon to watch. There's a building decarbonization OIR happening through the CPUC.
What is an OI? I'm sorry.
Order instituting rulemaking.
Okay.
So, did I get that right? Yeah, so it's the OIR. It's everyone knows.
But not everyone.
So, no, it may open up monies for pursuing building decarbonization through more current incentive mechanisms. There's 2 programs, Tech and Build, to keep an eye on, and how that money is going to flow to PG&E customers. There's also the relaunch of the incentive programs, the new construction request for abstracts saying, hey, the market, the companies of California that offer incentives, bring us new ideas. That request for abstracts just went out yesterday. So incentive programs as they were before are also changing. So you have these kind of 3 efforts to watch, and then also to get involved and say, I'm interested in being part of pilots that may affect West Sacramento. And that's a message that I could take back to colleagues and see what they say.
And I think I can speak on behalf of our council and mayor that we're raising our hand, and we're sitting here as part of that. So I think there's some homework for us to do on this, for me to be able to feel comfortable with this. I know it's not a mandate, but directionally incentivizing residents to change over. I'm going to have more clarity around what tools are at their disposal. So I appreciate you, again, taking part in the TAC and adding a voice to this, but I know we have city staff here as well. I think you probably met David, and I want to make sure we connect, and as that's a takeaway, at least for us on this part. So thank you. I did want to bring up another point as well. Thank you. And I want to get to I share the concern that was been raised around the equity in this particular one, and so that addresses a big part of it, because the unknown for our residents, and a large part of our residents in our northern part of our city, it's the oldest part of our city, and it tends to be the lower income part of our city, would bear the brunt of this change. And so, yes, they're renters, but they're also homeowners, to the point somebody made, I forgot who it was. So this one, out of all of them, maybe I see the direction the TAC wants to go, and I applaud sort of pushing us to think this way. The hard part of the implementation are households that have been there for 2 generations, 3. This is the source, their loan asset, source of wealth. And do they have the capital to make these changes? What incentives do they have? And looking at sort of the matrix that was accompanying this in terms of electrification, the community cost, which I'm assuming to be the cost borne by residents and maybe even local municipalities, it's going to be borne on us and them. So they have to expend the capital to make these changes happen. And so again, that's why I'm kind of raising my hand on this one. I think there's probably an opportunity in this. We just passed Measure N last fall, which was a quarter-cent sales tax, which isn't as much as they're seeing here in Sacramento, but we allocated about 30% of that tax to inclusive economic development, to look at programs to where it would help residents in neighborhoods that, or again, where there's opportunities to increase that. So again, that would be a source I would put under kind of an opportunity. That again, like Sacramento, there's lots of programs that are kind of making themselves available to that, but that's an area where there's probably opportunity as well.
Okay, thanks. Mackenzie, and then we will move to public comment.
Before we get to public comment, I did want to say, as a new commissioner here, I did have the opportunity to sit in on the Built Environment Technical Advisory Committee. And I want us all to thank the Technical Advisory Committee for all the work and effort they put in. We met for 4 meetings actually. 4 meetings, and we did have some very heated and heavy debates, and all of these issues were brought up in those conversations. And as you saw in the previous meeting, we came to you with a lot of strategies, and we were told we needed to whittle them down and go with what we thought was 3 of the most bold and audacious yet needed strategies to get us to the 2040 goal, right? 40 or 45, I can't remember right. But these were the 3 that really kept rising to the top. And we felt as if without these 3, we wouldn't really scrape the surface. So I would like to thank the Technical Advisory Committee, and I'm excited to get into the debate over these topics.
Can I just add my thanks also, both for the level of detail and expertise and the robustness of the conversations. I was not part of them, but I have heard about them. But also for the ability of the TAC to have brought us that level of detail, and then, which was clearly too robust for us with the time available to grapple with in the way that we need to. So, and then be able to change courses and come back with these very high-level strategies, which I think it feels to me like the most well-suited approach for a commission like ours, which is directional and ambitious, and therefore, in order to be decisive, needs to stay at a higher level. So I thank you for that.
Thanks, Meg. Thank you to the whole TAC, but also especially to Obadiah for your leadership. I just want to remind people that the background work that the TAC did and all the recommendations they had that didn't rise to the top and all the insights around various issues will still be part of the report. It's just that this commission is not necessarily endorsing each one of those statements that'll be included there. Okay, we should move to public comment. I think we have 10 or 11 folks and a few more. All right, 13. And then we'll come back to any other discussion we need to have on the merits and see if we can come to a conclusion. Okay, so each person, there'll be a clock, 2 minutes. If you want to go less than 2 minutes, can't offer you a prize, but a virtual prize. Okay, I will call 3 at a time, as is the custom. Excuse me for the pronunciation, but Danuta Drozdowicz, Kim Alexander, and Chris Brown. And if you could identify yourselves and your organization as you begin.
Good evening. My name is Danuta Drozdowicz. I'm a green building consultant, and my firm is Context Green. And while I fully applaud the electrification of new construction and all existing buildings, I would like to see more emphasis on energy efficiency assessments, particularly building envelope assessments, and incentives and mandates to make the buildings as energy efficient as possible before electrification. And the reason that this is significant is because when we have weather events, extreme heat, the building is losing energy much faster than it does when the temperature difference between the inside and the outside are, fairly equal. So it's important in terms of demand for the whole community as well as cost savings. And I would like to see that be for all buildings, because just because you can afford to spend more money on energy, it doesn't mean you should. It's not good for the community. So I'd like to see high-end homeowners have to do that assessment as well as they move toward an all-electric building. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Alexander.
Good evening. I'm Kim Alexander. I'm here with the Sierra Curtis Neighborhood Association. I want to thank you for your service on this very important commission. And I wanted to mention an issue that is very near and dear to my heart, which is the need to reduce the harmful effects of gas-powered lawn equipment. I'm sure many of you are aware that the California Air Resources Board has predicted that the emissions and pollution from this equipment will exceed that of all passenger vehicles in our state by next year. So this is something that our cities can play a leadership role on, and I think it's an issue that cuts across actually all three segments that you're looking at. It deals with how we build our homes and how we care for the areas around our homes, but also the mobility issue and wanting people to be able to walk and ride their bikes, which is just something not pleasant to do when people are using gas-powered lawn equipment. It's a public health issue as well, especially for the people operating the equipment. So some of the things that I hope you might consider building into your strategies are acts like having our cities convert your own equipment used in parks and lawn maintenance from gas to electric equipment, and setting an example. Not leaf blowing at all on spare the air days where it really becomes problematic. Helping schools and campuses convert to also using electric equipment rather than gas-powered equipment. We need to give people peace and quiet and clean air so they can enjoy our parks and walk and bike ride without risking their public health. The Valley Vision Survey underscored the need to prioritize air pollution in our communities, in our region, and I hope that you will take this into consideration as you work out new strategies for us to pursue in our region. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Brown?
Yeah, thank you very much. Represent the Sacramento Climate Coalition. Really appreciate the work that TAC did and the recommendations, but I think we're missing, as the earlier commenter made, the importance of energy efficiency. It's the least expensive method of saving greenhouse gases, and it's also important for the reasons that she said in terms of just we shouldn't be using energy in terms of the overall impact of the on the environment. That should be our first choice. The second one that I'm sad is missing is photovoltaics on rooftops. That would allow people to have lower bills. We could provide, as was mentioned briefly, direct install programs for low-income housing. That's a really important part of the mix, that we have incentives, mandates, and direct install where there are economic barriers for installation. All three of those need to be a part of all of these programs where you're dealing with retrofits. In addition, education is absolutely essential to the success of these programs. I'm an expert in water conservation and drought, and climate is like a drought. It's a long-running emergency, and we are facing an emergency right now. The cool weather we had in May had 6 to 8 degrees Celsius elevated temperatures in the Arctic. That means that they were 15 degrees higher than normal in the Arctic, which means more methane is coming into the atmosphere. We're facing an emergency. We need to deal with this stuff quickly, urgently. That's what we're facing. And I recommend that we move education, which in all of these measures is at the bottom of the page, to the top of the page. Each city has a responsibility to educate our citizens and our residents about the challenges we face, and that we need to participate in these programs immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three speakers are Kathy Less, Harold Thomas, and Megan Shumway. I just want to, while you guys come up, just comment on something Chris Brown said around the education, which is at the end of this process, we're going to look at some of the I guess, structural and overarching things that came up with every strategy. And as you said, education is a part of every strategy that we'll look at. So I anticipate at the end, we'll probably have an overarching recommendation around comprehensive education for the communities. So thank you. Kathy.
Yes, my name is Kathy Less, and I'm here on behalf of myself and as part of the Curtis Park Neighborhood Association. We've started an educational campaign in our neighborhood to educate our residents about the importance of clean and quiet yard care. And the reason we're doing this is because we understand how polluting this equipment is. The California Air Resources Board estimates there's almost 17 million pieces of this equipment, gas-fired lawn and yard care equipment going off every day. That would be one piece for every resident in California. 1 hour of a gas mower is the equivalent of driving a car 300 miles. This is according to the ARB. 1 hour of a gas leaf blower is the equivalent of driving in pollution 1,100 miles. That's a lot of pollution, and as Kim mentioned, The ARB has projected that as of next year, there will be more small particulate air pollution from gas-fired lawn equipment than there will be from cars in the state of California. I also want to point out it's very much an environmental justice issue. The ones that are being most harmed by all of this, in addition to our general air quality, is the people who are operating this equipment. And I know in the past, SMUD had a very nice and attractive rebate program to convert from gas to electric, and I assume it was probably done in tandem with the Air Quality District. I hope that they would start that up again. And also, in addition to just focusing on the individual homeowners, focusing on the businesses, the yard care businesses who use this machinery to render their services every day. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So to help you implement the comment that was just made, I would point you to the implementation tactics #1 in the built environment, #3 existing buildings, and where your current implementation tactic says incentivize property owners to install electric appliances when replacing natural gas. I would ask you to add the words after the words electric appliances, including all electric yard care appliances, and add private and public buildings, because there's no reason that this incentive or instruction should only be focused on private buildings, when in fact community colleges, cities, other institutions, private and public institutions, are using these same polluting devices. So there's no reason that we can't all be in the same boat together. Thank you. Harold Thomas. Speaking for myself and following my wife, who is the Sierra Curtis person.
Thank you, Hal. Megan Shumway.
I guess I'm here to put a little pressure on you, as if you don't need that. We're in a climate emergency, and a lot of these things you're talking about today are not going to be implemented until 30 years from now, like 25% transition at 30 years from now is not going to get us where we need to be to prevent any kind of climate disaster. So one thing is this needs to happen faster. So I would not be afraid of having a mandate that starts in 2020. I think that needs to happen, and I don't think that people are going to be upset with the decisions you make today. 40 years from now, what they're going to be upset with is the decisions you don't make today. The things that need to happen in order for us not to have a climate disaster. One of the things I think you might also consider is when the property sells, is to require a certain level of upgrade of the infrastructure to the electric system. And that way you might be able to deal with the existing residential facility, residential as well as commercial buildings. Every time that property sells, if there's a requirement that a certain percentage upgrade is made to electric, then you will find a much faster effect than just trying to provide incentives and hoping something happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Rick Codina, Molly Colton, and Ariane Ortagare.
Good evening, Commissioners, and thank you. I'm Rick Codina. I was on the TAC. I was a representative for 350 Sacramento. And first off, I'd like to say that the big picture for these recommendations is that the TAC got it right. The biggest direct greenhouse gas emissions are, of course, well, practically the only ones in homes and buildings comes from burning natural gas. So it's critical for the cities to transition to REACH codes that mandate replacing the gas appliances with cost-effective electric options that are on the market today. So building decarbonization is absolutely essential. I still think we need to look at the other side of the equation, which is the electricity generation, which Laurie mentioned. As she said, we would prefer that we had cleaner electricity faster. One of the original TAC recommendations is 75% by 2030. I know that's ambitious. But I would only add that we do want assurance that the commission goals for 2045 for net zero will dovetail with SMUD's IRP goals for that year in terms of actual emissions and not just offset emissions using electrification. I did want to point out some other things that are on the cutting floor of the TAC having to do with photovoltaics. We think that the cities could be a lot more proactive starting by inventorying their buildings and public lands for suitability for rooftop PV as well as standalone PV power stations. And then this is a cool equity idea, which is that cities can join forces with SMUD, PG&E, and nonprofits to build community solar projects that will benefit low-income renters, for example, in economically advantaged areas. Thank you.
And thanks for your participation on the TAC. Molly Colton.
Hello, Commission members. My name is Molly Colton. I'm speaking on behalf of Sierra Club California regarding the proposed recommendations for the built environment. While building electrification is integral to reaching our climate change goals, addressing embodied carbon emissions in the built environment and in the building materials themselves should not be overlooked. The manufacturing of building materials accounts for 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions. As operational efficiency of both new and existing buildings is improved, it will become even more crucial to address the embodied carbon emissions in the building sector. The state of California has figured out a way to do this. In 2017, the state legislature passed the Buy Clean California Act. It directs the state to purchase certain construction materials from manufacturers that have reduced their greenhouse gas pollution during the production process. Sierra Club urges the Building Environment TAC and the Mayor's Climate Commission to consider similar procurement policies into their carbon zero strategy for 2045. Thank you.
Thank you. Ariane?
Hi, I'm Ariane Ortegare. I'm representing Grid Alternatives North Valley. We are a nonprofit that makes solar power and solar job training accessible to low-income communities. Since 2015, we've installed nearly 250 megawatts of solar across 450 rooftops in Sacramento, among the hardest hit neighborhoods that have experienced unemployment and pollution, and have helped those families to save millions in collected savings. We know that these low-income neighborhoods spend more than twice as much on energy as a percentage of their income as much as medium and high-income households do. And at Grid, we believe that those that are most impacted by climate change, pollution, and the unemployment rates that come with it and income inequality should be among the first that benefit from all of the policies and investments in solar change, climate change and mitigation and adaptation. So while we agree with the committee that existing buildings should be transitioned to all electric, we want to make sure that we urge the commission to think about low-income households and have some specific strategy that makes sure that they are not unnecessarily burdened. We think that by pairing all electric with different initiatives, like clean solar power generation on-site or through community solar, you can have incredible impact in this strategy. It will make sure that it's a combined solution. You have the all-electric, but it's covered by these clean initiatives. And so we thank the committee and the TAC, and we really hope that we can work together on this. Thank you.
Okay, Glenda Marsh, Michael McCormick, and Justin Tweet. Glenda still here? Okay, thank you. Michael McCormick and then Justin.
Hi, everybody. Michael McCormick. I'm the Cool Davis Foundation Board President, Division President at Harrison Associates, and I was also on the Built Environment TAC. Great to be here tonight. Strongly support the recommendations of the Technical Advisory Committee, but also want to reflect on the fact that there was so much dialogue and so much depth of discussion that came to this conclusion. Many, many hours of work to get to these very specific recommendations. So I think one comment from earlier comments from the commission was mandates versus incentives. And I would say mandates and incentives aren't mutually exclusive. Working together, they actually have way more power than them individually. So if you have a mandate that also has incentives attached to it, you're going to really accelerate change over time. Urban growth boundaries, it's really hot politics on this one, but it's also one of the greatest benefits. Regional collaboration, county collaboration is really important. Look, it's not going to be easy. We all recognize that. But those jurisdictions that have moved forward with urban growth boundaries and county coordination and regional collaboration on this issue have made great progress on reducing emissions. Without constraining sprawl, the carbon neutrality goals will likely not be successful. And I think this is something really important for you all to think about because you've been empowered to be bold, right, and to be aggressive and to support things that wouldn't otherwise be supported in a climate action plan. Climate action plans have become relatively normal. In order to achieve carbon neutrality, you can't be normal. Be bold, be aggressive, and support this work moving forward. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Justin Tweet.
Good evening. Justin Tweet, 350 Sacramento. I wanted to lend my support for David Mogavero's presentation on the importance of urban growth boundary. The building of lots of transit-focused, dense housing is by far the most powerful lever cities have to lower their per capita emissions. It's hard to imagine a carbon zero city in the time frame required, which, by the way, is sooner than 2045, without a focus on density. I'm not sure about Sacramento, but roads and parkings cover anywhere from 40 to 70% of usable surface within the average U.S. city. So there's lots of opportunity. There's also overwhelming evidence that increasing housing supply is vital towards tackling the housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we've got two more speakers, Eleanor Arsbacher and Craig Coppin.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Arsbecker. I'm 17, a junior at C.K. McClatchy High School, a youth representative of 350 Sacramento, and absolutely terrified. The current climate emergency threatens life as we know it. It's a crisis, and crises cannot be treated with slow and gradual action, but only with complete 180s in how we act and bold new programs. Now is not the time to think about how intangible or inconvenient our solutions may seem at the time. That's a selfish mindset. Now is the time to act before we have no time at all. We have just 11 years to make significant headway in resolving this issue before climate change becomes irreversible. 2045 is 15 years too late. Though creating fast-acting policies may seem too abrupt or too disruptive of our current ways of life, we all must realize that postponing the creation of resolutions will eventually be more costly, and it will not just be a monetary price tag, but it will be our lives. My future, just like those of all current youth, is at stake. The effects of this issue will not fall on those responsible for taking action, but those who have barely any say in the matter. And that is why young students all around the globe are standing up and speaking out, because we have no other choice. No one else but us should have the right to dictate our lives, and to violate our authority over our futures is to violate the basic ideals of our country, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Regarding climate change as anything but the emergency that it is a surefire way to strip this right from all people and all life. This is a conversation based on logic and morality. We all must do what makes sense and what is right and work to preserve this planet and gift of life for ourselves and all the generations to come. Like Swedish activist Greta Thunberg and Nobel Peace Prize candidate said, "I want you to act as if our house is on fire, because it is." Thank you.
See what I mean? So we're just doing built environment today, right? Yeah. So in my international business class this semester, our professor gave us a task to come up with just one idea from the 7 different topics to kind of prepare for the climate summit. I came up with over 20 in all 7 topics, and I've realized that I wasn't alone. So that was kind of my, I guess, way to drill down the, let's get young people in this because we are extremely motivated. Just a few of my ideas were possibly, as a business major, money talks to me. And I understand that that is also one of the biggest reasons people don't really want to do anything with climate change. So I was wondering why we don't, as a city, provide something like free solar panels to impoverished areas like, I guess what was Oak Park, but more like South Sac and certain parts of Elk Grove, and take a little bit of their savings that they would, I guess, sell to PG&E or SMUD to help offset the cost until it's fully paid for, and then either take a lower percent or take 0%, so that way it immediately helps those people, not the homeowners, the renters, who are actually paying for the utilities. And possibly building a tiny home homeless community, getting them on Social Security, having them buy, again, their tiny home and end up just taking that out of their Social Security. And then after 10 years or so, they have some equity. They have a home that's worth about $10,000. So yeah, that's my time. Thank you so much for the work that you guys have already done. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, thank you all for your very insightful comments. For those of you who I didn't call, if you indicated on your card that you wanted to speak on something other than the built environment, we'll be taking care of that later on. Okay, so now it is time for us to take the bold and audacious action required of us. So, other discussion on the merits of the 3 strategies?
If I may?
Yes.
Sure, thank you. And thanks to all the speakers, and I'll say thanks to the TAC. I think the message is being sent. We didn't say enough, but thank you for all your work on this. And as the elected official representing West Sacramento, I know this is a passionate topic for many of the residents in West Sacramento, and they care about this issue very much, as do my own kids, who my 19-year-old is in my ear all the time about being a good climate commissioner as well as a good city council member. So yeah, the urgency is here. And the one thing, though, on these specific proposals that I've appreciated in the discussion so far is the willingness of all of us to sort of open up sort of areas that aren't comfortable for us. I think we're all dealing with the uncomfortableness of what this might mean to, I'm feeling it in terms of what it might mean to residents in our city, planning in our city, our business community in our city, and every sector within it. And it is a big responsibility for us. That's why we tread, it feels lightly towards it, because we have to think about all those constituencies and how we're going to get through it. But the overarching theme among us all, I think, is we're here because we care about this issue and we want to see it move forward. And the TAC recommendations today, and I have a couple of specific things that to bring up, are really pushing us to think about this differently. And I'm going to push back a little bit in terms of how we think about it as we go on to the next iteration of it. Because so much of this feels like we're one of the old base closing commissions, where we're sitting around the table thinking about which, Air Force base or Army base we're going to close, and it's going to cost people jobs. And that's not how I want to feel about this issue, because there's so much opportunity still on another side that we just haven't seen yet. And I was just talking to James about, and I think I spoke to a group of folks about the summit around in 350 Sacramento, and they had a summit a few months ago. Some of this is opportunity. We're tackling this now, and we just don't know it, and we've managed to make people's lives actually a little better. And I'll use the example of jump bikes and now scooters. And in our city, we've implemented the VIA microtransit system. And those weren't concerted efforts on our part to change or address climate change. They were actually our efforts to make lives a little better, to help people get around a little easier. And as a result, we're seeing jump bikes being one of the highest, if not the highest, ridership per jump bike in the country. And it's actually, I think we're starting to see some vehicle trip miles reduced. VIA, which is our microtransit system in West Sacramento that we just expanded and piloted for another year. We did it because we were frankly trying to address our own system, bus system, which wasn't getting to certain areas as frequently and as consistently as we wanted. So we created an on-demand bus system. It's reducing vehicle mile trips as well, but it's also brought about some social equity issues from people who are in poorer parts of our city able to get around. So I bring this up as a different lens about how we pursue this going forward, because it is easy to fall into not to do this or not to do this. And there is going to be some of that, there's no doubt. But I'm challenging all of us to think about what are the opportunities as a result of this, because there are some in here. And I'm going to bring up one in terms of the urban growth boundaries. I get the concept. This is not a big issue for me, to be honest with you, because we have them already. They're called levees around West Sacramento. and a lot of the areas, which I'm going to have to dig into this a little more, are around a couple of developments that are already entitled. And so I don't know if they would fall into this category in terms of how they would be presented. So we don't have a big, we've kind of put a ring around ourselves for flood protection issues, which ironically enough are being impacted and challenged even more because of climate change. So that's another story. But I think James was getting to the point around this that I'd like to flesh out even more, especially if we move it on, to get more connected with the mobility group. Because of JUMP, because of VIA, they're not in the suburban areas as prevalently as they need to be. Our community begged in the Southport area, which is the more suburban area of West Sacramento, begged for jump bikes to be reached that point. And now the challenge we're trying to I've been bugging David Tilley, our planner, and our city manager around how do we expand the network into traditional suburban areas. I think that's the point we're trying to get at. And the point I'm trying to make is just not good enough anymore for us to say we need transit-oriented development. Everybody knows we've invested heavily. We're one major redevelopment area that's focused on transit-oriented development. And if we had any issue, it's we don't have landowners building homes. That's our issue. But what I would say is I'm more interested in, I think what you were getting at is to start working as the mobility group starts to come around is how can this one link up to that one to address the form issues, to address how do we design neighborhoods differently in the future so that mobility options that are here today that weren't here 5 years ago and the ones that will be here 5 years from now that we don't even know about, to encourage that. I think that's the challenge for me that I'm seeing in this. There is a little bit, I get the urban boundary, and I'm sure my friends in Sacramento are going to have some more debate about this, and we all will. But I am very much interested in seeing how this connects to mobility, because we will get through residential, and I'm not trying to minimize the effects of this at all, but still the big elephant in the room is transportation being the biggest driver of emissions. And making transit, and my friends from RT are here, we've been working on streetcar, we've been working on other things to really make this more accessible. To me, that's where the challenge will lie. We're not done in my mind with this, sorry, TAC, I know you did a lot of work, but in my mind, I'd like to see it go back to address this issue, is how do you address transit-oriented development so it works, and how do you incentivize and have cities work with developers to create neighborhoods where it actually is built. And that's what I was kind of waiting for, is one of the big ideas. The boundaries I get, but frankly, if not transit ready, if they don't have built-in forms to make sure transit's available to them, it's not going to work still. So we've got to, in my mind, instigate that a little more. So on that one, again, from a big picture, what we proposed, I get it, but I think we need to refine it a little more, especially around, again, establish an efficiency metric around vehicle miles traveled. I'm interested in how we can address that more clearly by incorporating maybe mobility and their TAC and how this could fit in there. On the, and then the other item I want to hit was around the all-electric construction. I think this is, again, an area where I will need some education around. I already talked to our friends at PG&E, and thank you for being this, and as well as a conversion issue, is that we need to start building a better bridge with PG&E and even looking at our energy users and SMUD and everybody else so I better understand how this will affect us. I'm concerned, again, about the all-electric construction by 2023, only in the sense of where technology will leave us so that the people who are buying homes or the developers buying homes, they actually see the savings that we're creating. That's the one issue that I don't see how we all agree, and I think PG&E would agree, that you construct it, there's going to be a cost savings for the builder. But how do we ensure that the savings is passed on to the consumer? Because that's an assumption that's built in there. So again, I theoretically I'm okay with looking at this, but I'm not prepared as much to until I kind of understand better how those construction requirements or even what the technology so the homes are better. I mean, it's just, again, this is one that feels like we're just going to say no, but what's the yes look like? And where's the opportunity with that? And again, it's just an area that I'll just need to educate myself a little more around. So those are kind of two areas that I would kind of challenge the tax themselves to go back and look at and how they can present it to us on what the opportunities would look like. And again, so we can move forward on these. But again, I appreciate the tax work on this.
All right. Thanks, Chris. And I know some people have their hands up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Were you finished? No, that's okay. All good comments. But I want to clarify, this TAC isn't going to meet anymore. We already expanded it from 3 meetings to 4. And, this was an amazing group of experts from our communities that met. And we're very grateful for all their work. And I wish I could go on meeting forever. But unfortunately, to meet our timeline, it's okay, Obadiah. to meet our timeline to give the city timely input and the request from the mayors that this doesn't go on forever. This is a short in and out commission that's supposed to meet, for a year or less. So all that to say, we won't be sending it back to the TAC. Maybe some of these things will be addressed through the mobility TAC and the public health TAC later. And I know they've already done a lot of work. Maybe some of it addresses your questions that's in the background materials. So, I've got Mackenzie, Dr. Nelson, Lori, Flo, and Meg.
Just to piggyback on that.
Did I miss someone?
No. I feel a sense of tension, and I'm new up here on the dais, and I get it. I get that we all have constituents that we need to think about. But what I would like us to think about is that these are really just visionary strategies, and I think we're arguing about the actual implementation of the strategy, not necessarily looking at the big picture. I think it's not on us. I think we could free ourselves a hot second. It's not on us to come up with the implementation and how this looks on the ground, but just a high level vision and a strategy around this is where we think we need to go for the built environment. Chris, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Mobility has to fall into this, right? Like, it has to come in on the urban growth boundary piece. I come from Elk Grove. We drive 60 or 70% of my community drives to Sacramento, Rancho. I mean, we are one of the largest polluting VMT, and that is why I'm here. So I think we need to challenge ourselves to kind of draw that line in the sand and say, look, we need to look inward for development. And you're right, the strategies and how it plays out on the ground, that's going to take more meetings and more conversations. So let's just challenge ourselves to think about these as high-level strategies.
Robert Nelson.
I take comfort in that we're not finished tonight, okay? And I think that we're approaching it in some ways as if we're finished tonight. You know, for me, with number 2, if we say mandate and incentivize all electric construction in new residential and commercial buildings we'll have worked there. So we've got time to be able to massage these and think them through. And I think that's the way we need to be looking at this. We've got time to be able to do economic impact. The data that we got tonight earlier about the cost savings, I think, was very insightful. So I would encourage all of us to go back and refine what we're doing and then have that further discussion. You know, as I said, I'm worried about equity. If I add that word incentivize in that number 2, I'm not worried about equity as much anymore in that particular one, okay? So let's take the time to be able to massage them and get the data that we need so that we can move forward. When we give these to the mayors, they've really got something substantial in their hands.
Okay, I've got Lori, then Flo, then Meg. You needn't. And then.
I was going
to said it
and
well.
I agree with what Mackenzie said also, but I want to say a little bit more. I think we should adopt all of these 3 proposals. They're necessary, and we're going to need to do them. I keep going back to what Ellie said. We have 11 years, and yes, some of this is going to be disruptive, and some of it's going to be hard, but we're talking about this. The discussions are really important, but we need to move forward. It's 11 years, and in 12 years, we don't want to say, oops, we made a mistake in not doing this. The kids are watching us. We're watching us. This is more of an emergency than the media is telling us or that people are talking about. It's an emergency, and so it's time to go out of our comfort zone. Right now, we're only asked to vote on these big picture items, and I think that that's easy for all of us because we don't have to do the implementation, but we need to move forward, and I think it's all of the above. We've got to do these 3 big things, but we've got to do all those other things because our survival our survival depends on it. And I think we've got to really embrace that, and it's not easy.
Thank you. Flo.
Great. I definitely agree with a lot of what has been said here tonight, so I want to get straight to the point. I also think we should approve these recommendations. I think they are solid. What I would like to see happen is the charge going forward to the future tax to build upon the things that we've adopted. So we have a mobility tax. We've talked about the Elk Grove polluters. We've talked about the need for, that is the official term, by the way, now. Anybody who lives in Elk Grove, polluter is now after your name. No, kidding. But we've talked about the needs to be able to have infrastructure and transportation in place and all of that. So as we go to public health, as we go to the mobility tax, let's make sure that they know we passed this, and they can then think about how that layers on top. Because then when we come with recommendations, they'll be fully fleshed out recommendations that are, that can go in the next direction. I'm now going to put on my Measure U hat because I know that is going to be one of the places that we're looking for potential. And so the thing I will say is that I'm encouraging us to not just allow this to be part of the cap and go other places, but to actually bring it to council, bring it to our new investment committee that is under the city manager's office, and bring it to the the Measure U Commission and say to us, here are some projects. Your job now is to figure out how much they're going to cost, how quickly you're going to roll them out, et cetera. But bring them to us, because I think that these are great opportunities and they fit in a lot with some of the things that we need to be doing. So with that said, I think we should move forward. The only thing I would say that we could potentially consider adding to them would be the energy efficiency. I don't think that takes anything away from saying we're going to try to electrify and make sure we do energy efficiency. It doesn't make sense to pull babies out of the river if there's still somebody throwing in them up. Right? We need to make sure we take the person who's throwing babies out of the river out of the way, and then also make sure that we're catching any ones that slip through the cracks. So that's a public health metaphor for those of you who don't get it. We can talk later. The bottom line is making sure that we can, I think both of those operate in concert and we could do them together, making sure we're both energy efficient and switching over to electrification. And I don't think that changes the spirit of what's been proposed here, but I think it actually enhances it in a way that's really helpful. So those are my comments. That's my swan song, and you don't have to deal with me anymore.
And when's your Measure U committee meeting?
Our next Measure U committee meeting is June 12th. Right. So I look forward to seeing all of you there, telling us exactly what we need to do moving forward.
Mike? Okay, sorry, we're all getting goofy because we're hungry. Yeah, your turn.
I have a question. Thank you very much, Kate, for clarifying. I didn't understand. I thought this was the final form that was going up to the city. So I appreciate that we have a little bit more time to massage or clarify these a little bit more. But if they're not going back to TAC, how does that happen? Does that happen offline, emails? How do we deal with this? Do we know that yet?
So as proposed, we would be doing that in the final meeting, but if there are a few items that come up like this, like if you all said we support Flo's proposal to add EE, then I would suggest that I work with Flo to do this, through us, through LGC, and then we'd bring that back.
Thank you.
And we'll have to incorporate, at least in the report, even if it's not stuff that gets put in the strategies, the input we get from the business roundtable, and that we continue to get from the equity roundtables. Okay, Alberto.
Go ahead, Albert.
Oh.
Well, I'll go ahead and, with the understanding that the process going forward will allow the process and this commission to look into and address many of the very good concerns that we have heard here today and from the audience, and recognizing that it's important for us to adopt clear and strong, broad direction for this committee. Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion and propose that this commission adopt the 3 strategies that the TAC has put forth.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Game on, okay. All right, I will ask if there's any more discussion before the vote. Arlen, then James.
Great. I want to support the motion. I think we've been charged as a commission to look at how to dramatically reduce the carbon of our region, and we can't do that with taking half steps. So I think we do need to be very bold here. I think what the TAC has laid out is both bold, but it's actually achievable, and it's important that these things be achievable. And I think that there are more opportunities here than barriers to success and to jobs in our area and to address some of the equity issues we have. We know that with electrification, and I would support, I don't have the metaphors that Flo does, but I would support the addition of energy efficiency, because that is the way you ultimately reduce the energy burden on people by lowering their bills. But we also know that with electrification, you can lower their bills in a secondary way, so as well as to the environmental improvements. So I think it's important that we take bold action. I think at the end, we will have the opportunity to rationalize across all 3 of the recommendations to look for the intersection and the alignment and tweak where we need to be tweaked. And if we need to make refinements on the language, I think that's a good opportunity, because I think that's the point where we can make sure we've got tight alignment. But at this point, I would concur that we should move forward with the recommended actions.
Thank you. James, and then Stephanie.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you to the TAC and for all the work and the public comment tonight. It really is, it's very impressive. And it really, it's helpful for me to hear the discussion on the commission and Ann and Kate kind of you reminding us that we're recommending to the two cities, right, to be bold. And I think with that, I've got a couple of comments. And then I still have a very outstanding remaining concern on the first recommendation. So my comments are, I heard a lot about concerns around equity and around low-income communities and an undue burden on low-income households, and I would like to somehow make sure that we, I think across all three recommendations, put that loud and clear. Low-income households should be benefiting from these strategies, not the other way around. Second, I heard a little bit of concern about business. And I do want to make sure, again, this is for the cities to figure out, and I have lots of confidence they can do it, but I think we want to make sure that a lot of the small businesses are not unduly affected by this. I don't think that takes away from any of the recommendations. Third, I'm interested in whether we could speed up some of the, I don't know this, I'm not an expert on building electrification, but can we recommend doing it sooner than 2023 or 2030? So those are all questions I'm happy to support goals 2 and 3. Here's my problem on goal number 1, is I think it's apples and oranges. The recommendation for an urban growth boundary is not the same thing. And so just bear with me for a second. So SACOG represents 6 counties and 22 cities. This is what we do. We do the implementation. This falls to us. The 2 cities, right, there's a lot you can do as 2 cities, but really this is a regional action. We have a lot to be proud of in this region, that we have a blueprint plan that was adopted in 2004 that is about smart growth and phased growth. We have a sustainable community strategy that we desperately need to implement. It reduces our carbon emissions by 19% per capita. It is a phased growth strategy. It is a smart growth strategy. It's about what happens inside that development. It is not simply urban growth boundaries. I think that's way too simplistic a recommendation. I have a friendly amendment to it that I'd like to offer. Bear with me, okay? So, because I think it is about, and David, I really appreciate your presentation of what you're trying to accomplish, and I agree with your goals. But I think we need to focus, so this is something towards the following, and I'm open to massaging this. Focus on, this is how it would read, facilitating and supporting future growth in areas consistent with the regional sustainable community strategy. That's our mandated growth strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, with an emphasis on catalyzing infill and transformation in existing centers and corridors, because those are the places that are absolutely key. All growth should be consistent with blueprint principles of compact communities, resource conservation, productive use of existing assets, housing diversity, and mixed use. I know it's wordy, but I can't support an urban growth boundary recommendation given who I represent, and I do think that this is something, if the 2 cities want to recommend an urban growth boundary strategy, the other 26 jurisdictions on my board are going to have to adopt that, and I will tell you that the recommendation of a UGB is going to fall really flat, and I don't want that to happen. And that's my friendly amendment.
All right, thank you. So Helena was trying to type as fast as you spoke. Did you catch that?
Could you repeat the?
And then you can put it up on the screen, right? Okay, and everyone can see what we're talking about here.
Focus on facilitating and supporting future growth in areas consistent with a sustainable community strategy, with an emphasis on infill and transformation in existing centers and corridors, period. All growth should be consistent with blueprint principles of compact communities, resource conservation, productive use of existing assets, housing diversity, and mixed use. I usually like short and sweet, and I recognize that's not that, but it's meaningful.
Hopefully it's the sweet, but even if it's not short. I'm wondering if it's helpful, though, for those of us who are more lay people on this commission to just explain how that's different. so we know what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. So, so our region, we're in the middle right now of developing a new, by state law, Senate Bill 375 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have to develop a sustainable communities strategy. That growth pattern has to show reduction in transportation greenhouse gas emissions region-wide by 19%. We're in process of doing this, and all of our jurisdictions are involved. It does not involve, I want to be clear, it does not involve drawing a line around the existing growth that we have today on the ground and saying that's it, enough. And I do think, David, that's a spirit of the tax recommendation, right? So I just want to be clear. This region has all the way back to the blueprint plan from 2004, has adopted a smart growth plan. And it includes future growth in areas that are currently undeveloped, but our goals are those principles, the blueprint principles, the second sentence there, of doing it in a way that is walkable, compact, it doesn't produce as much VMT. It is also about 2/3 of our future growth through this strategy is infill and centers and old arterial corridors. Think Folsom Boulevard was mentioned, Auburn Boulevard. We have to get housing, affordable housing and mixed use in those corridors, but it is not 100% in those. So I want to be clear about that. But if the two cities were to adopt a recommendation that says urban growth boundaries, the other 26 jurisdictions would need to adopt that, and I don't think that's going to be an effective recommendation. And I don't think they're going to listen to the rest of the recommendations that fall underneath that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm doing the best I can to explain this and how important it is for our organizations, our members.
All right, Stephanie?
The red one.
Yes, so I can appreciate that. I think, for me, one of the reasons why I'm in favor of the motion that's on the table is that based on all of the presentations that I heard tonight, they met kind of three imperatives that are in my mind, right? Economic, right? What makes sense in terms of the cost and how efficient these approaches are. Another is moral. Is it the right thing to do? And have we had the conversation, it sounds like the TAC has, around, what are those consequences, including those that would be unintended, right? And then there's an equity imperative, which I think we can't ignore. We've talked a lot about the importance of making sure that this is inclusive. We talked about making sure that communities understand the issue and understand how it can impact them. We talked about creating incentives, and we talked about making it economically feasible for not only homeowners, but renters, right? All of those issues were raised. And so my question to you, in amending what's been on the table, in your mind, would this meet all three of those imperatives?
I think it would, because I think it would have if we could get to this, we would be reducing greenhouse gas emissions and we'd be producing, I think, more equitable communities. But that's based on, right, this is my day-to-day job. So I believe this is feasible. It's going to take a heck of a lot. We're trying to get, it's referenced in here, state support $400 million to subsidize infill development and affordable housing because the market doesn't actually do this right now. We've got skipped over arterial corridors. So I think it does, but I think it's an excellent question.
Yes, I try not to speak tonight, but I think I do really, say the benefits of these three initiatives. But I also say, what Stephanie and James, you guys actually, I think, on the same page in terms of, what the amendment, James just put together. So I would like to support James' friendly amendment on this, the first initiative. So that's, I would like to propose.
Thanks. Thanks, James, for all the extra words.
That will never be said again.
I do appreciate them. I I did feel, as I think you alluded to in your comments, that there was something a little bit different in the nature of the first strategy as it has originally been written, that was more in the nature of prescribing the tactic rather than prescribing the desired outcome. Whereas the other two strategies seemed, to me at least, to be worded in the sense of prescribing the desired outcome and leaving it to the details of the cities as to how those outcomes would best be accomplished and most suitably be accomplished. And so just from a consistency perspective, which seems to be important to me, I value and would support this friendly amendment.
I want to be really clear, this is not status quo. I also would understand if the commission wants to go a different way. This is not status quo. This would be a huge change in the shift of our development patterns.
I mean, particularly because the Sustainable Community Strategy, sorry, Flo, will contain within it the 19% GHG reduction target.
I just want to speak to a point of process. I've been listening to everybody. I know it was offered as a friendly amendment, but I actually think it is a substantive. And so I think that we should vote on the, take yours as a motion to amend the main motion, and we should vote on that. And then we can decide what to do, depending what happens on that. We'll either vote on the amendment or go back to the original motion.
I have a question.
Yeah, Flo, and then.
What I was going to say was, it sounds.
Sorry, just before that, though, so is that how?
That's fine.
Okay, so we'll proceed with, James has made a motion to amend, and we need a second on that.
So Meg's comment brought something up to me, which is that there is a way less wordy way of achieving this, which is just saying establish urban growth boundaries by 2025. And then going into this below it, because then we don't get into we could talk about some of these other things, but urban growth boundaries is the strategy that we're trying to do, and we don't have to say only limiting it to existing. We can talk about some of the other strategies that have already been in place, and that leaves some flexibility in it. So I just wanted to offer that as a potentially way less wordy, snappy way that I could explain this to my great-great-grandmother, because that would make absolutely no sense to her, but this would. So I just wanted to offer that as a potential snappier.
And my question on that is, was there someone from SACOG at the built environment where this was discussed and not incorporated into the recommendations from the built environment TAC? Has it already been talked about there and not included?
I think Casey Lazan came, not to all of them, but I think.
I just want to make sure they didn't already talk about that and did not recommend it.
Somebody who was the TAC maybe can weigh in.
Do you remember?
I do know there was SACOG recommendation. I do know that we did talk about the potential pushback for the constituents outside of West Sac and Sac, Oak Grove being a representative from Oak Grove. I mean, I get it. We're doing an SOI expansion. But again, I take us back to, we have 11 years. We need to be bold. And I struggle to know how we can actually measure if we are reaching the SCS strategies currently. The blueprint or this document's been available for quite some time. And so far, we have not been successful in putting pressure on our cities and counties to focus on infill development.
All right, that's why we're going to vote on the amendment to decide what we're doing here. All right, just a second. I've got James's motion to amend. Do we have a second on that?
I second.
Okay, and now we're talking on the motion to amend.
I second that, but
Okay.
I was just going to a process question, because in terms of seconding James' motion, but in terms of Alberto's initial motion, was he suggesting that we take all three together as is or separate those out?
So I was going to try to help and say, I would amend my original motion, understanding that the proposal, from my perspective, I think is going to allow us to get to the same place, and both are going to converge. So I would amend the original motion, that we accept the changes and explore maybe a few less words if it's possible, but fundamentally that we accept the changes proposed by Mr. Corliss, that we continue to carry the number 2 and number 3 strategy, and to also try to integrate, to the extent possible, energy efficiency and equity in whatever we end up as a package of the strategies moving forward. So that's my amended original motion.
Second that.
Okay, sorry. This is what we're doing, okay? We are going to vote on the motion to amend your motion. Okay? That's how it works. That's how it
Whatever you
works.
said, Madam Chair.
Okay?
Withdraws.
Unless you withdraw.
Because he's friendly amending his to
I second.
reflect yours, so unless you withdraw and the second withdraws, then up to
I
y'all.
think it's cleaner to vote on this. That's my.
Okay, so he's with.
So I
with
withdraw
not
what I
withdrawing.
just said then. And then-
Okay, that's what we're going to do. So now we're going to
Yes.
debate the motion to amend and use this language up here instead of the urban growth boundary language.
And so I have a comment, which is.
First I
Oh,
have,
go ahead.
is that what you guys want to talk about? Yes.
I'm concerned that we're setting a bad precedent right now, because we are here to vote on concepts tonight, not on exact wordings. And we're going to come back to you and have that discussion offline, as to use Mike's term. But we're going to be amending all of these there. If we can just, settle on the concept, then we have that chance. If the concept is sustainable community strategy in lieu of the urban growth, then we vote on that. But I'm hesitant to have as many words as we've got. I would have to vote against it because it's too prescriptive right now, and it would lock us in on the others, and we'd set the precedent on the others that we're not going to go back and look at them.
Okay, well then, you may vote against. Other comments or discussion? Julia and Lori.
My comment is back to, I think, the original reason James proposed this, which is the reality of success in the future. And so I would support a shortened, non-prescriptive, amended statement. So, because we want this to be successful. We don't want Mayor Steinberg and Mayor Cabalden to go to SACOG and have a vote saying we're not establishing an urban growth boundary. But if there is a chance that we can do really bold things under this, then I think we should do it.
Okay, we can't really wordsmith right now, I don't
No,
think.
but
So we would vote on this.
Iterative, as Dr.
And
Nelson
then
has said.
it could get wordsmithed over the coming months. Lori?
Could we revisit this at the very end? Like, could you revisit this at the very end after after all of the TACs have come together, when you make your final recommendations? Could you revisit this then?
Yes.
Because I think it may help to have all of the TACs report in before we start wordsmithing final recommendations.
Yeah, but we do need to vote tonight.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Lori?
Well, I don't know enough about all of this to vote with knowledge. I would want to hear what David had to say about this and the differences and whether this is acceptable under what the TAC was trying to do.
Question then. Henry's calling the question.
I just want to vote.
He's calling the question. If the committee agrees to that, I think we should move on. Okay. So this is on the motion to amend just on the first strategy to use this language up on the screen. Okay, we'll try to do it just by a raising of hands. All those in favor? Okay. Wait, sorry.
Give her a minute.
Leave the hands up.
Leave the hands up.
Yeah. Opposed? All right. Any abstentions? Julia is abstaining.
I'm voting. I decided.
Okay. Trish is abstaining. Okay, so we will go back now and vote on the original motion. Oh, no. with the new language in it,
Yeah.
with
Right,
the new
right,
language in
right.
it.
Okay, so we will vote with the revised number 1 and the original as proposed, number 2 and 3. That's the motion.
And as I understand it, with the understanding that the energy efficiency
And the
and
equity
equity
piece be
issues
folded
will
into
be
the
folded
extent.
in as time
Yes.
evolves.
Can I ask a process question? So why not take, so I don't want to be the one that votes no on one thing and then.
Divide the question?
Yeah, I do.
We will divide the question. Yeah. Okay. So we are now, is that all right with you, the maker of the motion?
That is-
Yes.
that is fine.
So we're going to vote just on this part.
I thought we just.
So we did.
We got 10 on that. That one
Well, that was to
forward.
amend the motion.
Yeah.
So we still need, we still need to vote on it, just to make it clean. Maybe someone will change their mind. All right? All those in favor
Of number 1,
of number 1?
As amended.
as amended.
Still the 10. Okay, opposed? All right, abstentions?
And one
Yeah,
abstention.
and 1 abstention. Okay, that motion carries. And we'll now go to strategy number 2 around the new buildings. All right.
I make a motion that we.
You don't have to do it again,
okay.
you're cool. All right. Okay,
Now we're doing 2 and 3 or just 2?
we're just
two.
doing 2. We're
Okay.
going one at a time. This is the purported easy one. Okay. All those in favor? Okay. But no? Abstentions? Okay, so that carries also. So now we're on to
Number 3.
number 3, electrification of existing buildings. All right, all those in favor? Opposition? Abstentions? Julia, just to be clear, you voted on everything. All right. Okay. You did it.
You did it.
No, we do need, we have a little more public comment. I just want to say thank you to everybody. It's really hard, and this is a great, great first step towards getting it done. Okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who wish to speak, if you're all still here. Alex Denuzzo, David Baker, and Bruce Burdick. David and Bruce are gone, okay. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Alex Denuzzo. I'm a high school student. I'm 15 years old. I'm here because it is my future that you guys are deciding here today. In that vein, as was talked about earlier, a youth face on this board would give a voice and recognize that decisions made here will impact future generations for a long time. At the start of this meeting, it was said that the goal of this commission is to provide bold and ambitious solutions to the climate crisis. The suggestions heard here today are simply not bold enough. There are a great step in the right direction, but recent studies have shown that steps are not enough. At this point, we need to be running. And it is young people like me who will feel the worst effects of our lethargy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, there's no name. Extinction Rebellion? Bridget Duffy and Brian Shoby. None of you are here? Brian?
I'll go last. Good evening, Commission members. Brian Shobe. I just wanted to express some concerns about the way the process just unfolded. As a future TAC member on the Community Health and Resiliency TAC, it feels to me like what just transpired is that the months of work that went into informing the TAC recommendations as well as the presentations tonight, which is what I believe the decisions should have been made upon, was revised in the moment without information by one member of the commission. And I just think that sends an alarming message to the future TAC members. So I realize that the vote has taken place, but would ask you all to consider and reflect on how that transpired and what it communicates to the TAC members. That said, it's been a long evening. So I do want to say I came into tonight's meeting enthusiastic about these recommendations. And to borrow a line from someone else who was in the news a lot today, I think the report speaks for itself. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your comment. Okay. I guess you can. I'll skip my closing remarks, other than just to say thank you very much. Much appreciation to all of you, to the TAC, to LGC, and those members of the public who are here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we got there.